Good morning, everyone. I'm Joaquin Esquivel, Chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. Today is Tuesday, November 2nd, and it is 9 a.m. and I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing my fellow board colleagues. With me here today is Vice Chair Doreen D'Adamo, Board Member Sean McGuire, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Nicole Morgan. Joining us as well is our Executive Director, Eileen Sobek, our Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer, our two Chief Deputies, Eric Oppenheimer and Jonathan Bishop, and our Clerk of the Board is Janine Townsend, and assisting her today is Margie Argel and Courtney Tyler. As you can see, this meeting is being webcast and recorded. In order to comply with the various distancing requirements, and we do not have a physical meeting room today, as we have not had for nearly almost over a year and a half now. And you are either viewing us one of two ways. You are on our YouTube live stream or on the Cal EPA website. But if you intend to comment on any of the items today on our agenda, you need to be here on the Zoom platform with us. There are instructions on how to do so on our website, and there's a link at the top of the agenda. If you are having challenges or trouble with that, please do email comment letters at waterboards.ca.gov, and our Clerk of the Board will help you get onto the platform here with us. Once you're on here, your camera will be off, you'll be muted until your item is up and your moment to speak. And so just thank you for that patience. And this morning, we're actually not starting off with public forum, but today we have a presentation of Superior Accomplishment Awards. These awards are given to incredible staff and projects that our supervisors here nominate and then grant awards to. So it's a really great part of the work that we do here to be able to acknowledge our staff. And so with that, I believe we have 3 awards. And the first is going to be presented by Yvonne West, our head of the Office of Enforcement. Good morning, Ms. West.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, members of the board. It's a pleasure for me to be here today talking with you about this award, which we are giving to Stephanie Young. Stephanie Young is a senior WRC specialist with our office, and she is receiving this award for her excellent work in stormwater enforcement. I can say from firsthand experience that Stephanie is a pleasure to work with. She brings her expertise and her enthusiasm to every task, whether it is a complex question regarding how to calculate stormwater mandatory minimum penalties, or making sure that hundreds of notices get mailed to stormwater non-filers. She always seems to do these daunting tasks with a smile, and she makes others smile and laugh as well. Stephanie was nominated by Matthew Beflavin, the Investigation and Technical Assistance Section Manager in the Office of Enforcement. And Matthew would like to tell you a little bit more about the excellent work that Stephanie has done for us.
Thanks, Yvonne. Yes, Stephanie started working at the water boards in late 2018, and she brought a lot of enthusiasm and a very strong work ethic to her new position. As a senior specialist, she has 2 main tasks. One is individual enforcement cases, where she investigates violations and prosecutes those. These are usually very complex cases and time-consuming. But another important role for her is to improve our enforcement programs at the water boards. And this is an area where she really excelled, and really want to talk about 3 initiatives that she really has spearheaded for the Office of Enforcement and for the state and regional water boards. These 3 areas included improving the required Stormwater Enforcement Act reporting. The second one was to improve the enforcement process for overdue non-exposure certificates in the stormwater program. And finally, she's working very collaboratively with US EPA on a non-filer enforcement program in environmental justice communities. Certainly a priority for the state water boards and for our office. I want to say that these 3 efforts had several common themes to them. One is an extensive dive into the data and the databases, and really understanding the limits of the data within those and improving them so for future efforts and making sure that the next round of all of these 3 initiatives were easier in the future. Another common theme throughout these 3 initiatives, as Yvonne alluded to, is just sometimes there was a lot of tedious tasks with these. And this included hundreds, really thousands of emails and letters sent to dischargers that had overdue reports, and responding to those and being very active and engaging the community. And then finally, working very collaboratively with all the stakeholders, certainly the internal stakeholders, working with the region board staff and managers, also with the Division of Drinking Water, but also working with our external stakeholders too, particularly US EPA and Region 9 from a non-filer effort. I can, without hesitation, say that without Stephanie leading these efforts, they would not nearly be as successful. So it's my honor and pleasure to nominate her and to award for the award of superior accomplishment.
Congratulations, Stephanie. I don't know if she's able to make it here today with us. If so, she's invited to come off camera, but if not, just thank you incredibly. Just last week was participated in CASQUA's conference, the California Association of Stormwater Qualified Engineers or Association. And so it was absolutely fantastic to once again be reminded of the critical work that is being done in the stormwater sector here. And importantly, making sure that it's a resource here in drought, but also in other times as well, where we're really maximizing these beneficial uses. And stormwater is sometimes something of an afterthought, certainly a bleeding edge when it comes to really, again, maximizing our usage of what are otherwise nuisance waters. And so really appreciate Stephanie's work here, and congratulations. Thank you.
Stephanie's here with us, and she actually did a lot of background work for our presentation for that conference. So hopefully she can turn her camera on. But thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Stephanie, and really appreciate all the great work that you've done for us here.
And I'll just say
virtual clap.
Stephanie has unmuted herself. If she wants to say anything, she doesn't have a camera on today.
Okay, fantastic.
Oh yes, thank you very much, everyone. I truly appreciate the acknowledgement of all the work you described. It has been my deepest pleasure to work with all the wonderful people in the state and regional water board stormwater programs, as well as the great attorneys and people at the Office of Enforcement to make these things happen. I truly appreciate their trust in helping and accomplishing all these projects. So without them, I wouldn't be getting this award. So I thank all of them. It is just the beginning, and I look forward to our continued collaboration. Thank you, everybody.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Stephanie. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Yvonne, and for the nomination and presentation here. Next, we have our Director of the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance, James Knockbower, to present 2 additional awards. Good to see you, James.
Thank you. Yes, good morning, Chair and board members. I really appreciate this opportunity to recognize on your behalf the people of the Office of Research, Planning, and Performance responsible for actually not 1, but 2 entire areas of board-wide importance, the training team and the emergency management program. So I'm going to first speak about the training team. And this is a super special program. And I think some of our colleagues across the boards may not appreciate how unusual it is to have a training program that allows them to go to conferences and external courses, that prepares and makes available an extensive set of in-house courses that were developed by and for the water boards, and that has such an array of courses that people value and learn from, that were developed in ways that invite input from all of our regions, divisions, and offices, and are grounded in our specific mission and circumstances and in the needs of our 115 different classifications here at the boards. In contrast, folks at other departments or agencies are more likely to have a much harder time attending conferences. The training focus of many groups is just on mandatory training. And in some cases, folks are just directed to LinkedIn or other providers for non-customized courses. I'll start by recognizing Jennifer Julian Nakamura. She's the training liaison for the office. She helps us know what courses are coming and how to access them. She also works with the training team to improve communications with all of the training liaisons across the boards. She works kind of as both a beta tester and a consultant for our interactions between ORPP and the training liaisons. But this training work is just part of her broader role in ORPP. She's very important for our culture and for our smooth operation. She's a tremendous resource and partner with great knowledge, connections, attitude, and skill. And it's really clear when she takes vacation how much complex work she's doing. Next, I'll turn to Stephen Gonzalez, who has an amazing reputation for customer service. He helps people get trained and get to conferences. He shares the information people need and is adapting to the constantly changing rules that we all work within. It's clear he really wants to get you to yes, and if you can't get to the course or can't get to the conference, he will explain why that's not possible. He also plays a role in onboarding the training liaisons around the organization, and he's worked on our training request form and other process automation on his own and with DIT. He's got a great thirst for knowledge and really wants to learn more. He volunteers to help out others on the team and takes on new projects. And he's got a big heart. He cares really deeply about what he does and about what we all do. I'll turn now to Lindsay Wright and Sarah Saley. These are the dream team that make the Water Leadership Program and our other Academy courses happen. They develop an extensive course catalog for the Academy together. Sarah in particular is the primary contact for developing new training programs. She works with staff throughout the water boards to develop proposals and works with them to clarify learning objectives, intended audiences, and how best to design materials. And then after the courses, she evaluates, reviews evaluations and works with instructors to improve their courses. She's very thoughtful and considerate and is always thinking about how to best meet the needs of the various staff across the organization. And she takes the time to really understand the needs of everyone who comes to her requesting a course. Lindsay handles the logistics and coordination for our Academy courses. She really knows her stuff. It's worth pointing out that building one of these courses is about as complicated as planning a public meeting or a workshop. So it's a lot of work. She's also involved in improving our processes and co-leads with Sarah the planning of our annual Academy course catalog. I really appreciate her sense of the big picture, the good questions she asks, and how well she juggles a range of priorities. And Don Peering has supported both the training office and the training academy. His work is crucial for accurate data. This is data about the courses people need, the courses people have access to. He's involved in making sure the records of the courses people have completed move with them as they change jobs, and also helps track compliance and who does or doesn't show up for courses. He's super effective, and we really value how he copes with all these manual processes and incomplete data that are pervasive within the training space. He's also a great communicator. And Carol Perkins, she works in our cross-cutting technical services team for training. She's helped develop the Water Leadership Program and some supplemental resources, such as the online writing lab, or the OWL. Outside of training, she's heavily involved in running the external scientific peer review program for all of Cal EPA with some other colleagues in ORPP. And I'm struck by how excited she is to learn new areas and how she's always finding new ways she can help and contribute. Jamie Ferguson is a supervisor in the training office, is constantly involved in the triage and fire drills of keeping things moving and keeping things on track. She works with the liaison, she tracks budgets, she tracks contracts, and provides amazing customer service. Beyond the clarity and expertise she brings, I really appreciate how she helps the team cope with change and makes people feel valued. And she always makes an effort to keep the team informed of the positive feedback she's hearing from around the boards. And Katie Landau, she's our team leader. She tracks the big picture to benefit the team. She's super knowledgeable about the organization and has great historical knowledge and connections that make things go well. She also brings her science and GIS and Excel skills to help in many ways, such as when we're scoping out technical courses. She supports and reassures the team. She confidently explains and delivers information, and she always explains how training fits into the big picture. So if maybe the team could turn on their cameras and we could do a group photo.
Virtual clap.
Hey.
Incredibly appreciative of the work that the Training Academy does. And will note that I know there's a number of board members, myself included, who have taken advantage of the incredible courses at the Training Academy. And just it is a critical part of the leadership development and opportunities that we try to provide all of our incredible folks here at the water boards. And just can't thank you enough. I know it takes a lot to make sure that these programs and new courses continue on. I think of R and some of the new programming languages that courses are being developed around, and incredibly just have to thank you for this great work. And anyone want to say a few things, by all means? Okay, hearing none, just want to thank you again then, and incredible work. Just thank you so much.
Wonderful. And now I'll turn to our second amazing cross-cutting ORPP team, the Emergency Management Program. They've been dealing with COVID, with drought, with fires, with an oil spill, with lots of other spills, with an invasive species, with earthquakes. And they've played a huge role since the formation of this program in leadership across the organization and in capacity building. We've now got better networks of relationships, better support, better training, and a clearer sense of the bigger picture of emergency management. These efforts have improved our internal and external coordination over the entire life cycle of emergencies. Fires, for example, used to be a huge trouble to accommodate, and they're still really complicated and time-consuming, but the work is much more routine and much less disruptive. The Emergency Management Program is also setting a really high standard and inspiring other efforts. For example, they took ideas about using GIS data to Cali, PA, and that took off and is now part of a statewide initiative. We'll start with Amelia Gomez. She's worked on COVID with the PPE provision and logistics for that, for getting masks and things out to everybody. She's worked on coordination of the water board volunteers who have supported Cal Recycle's efforts at fire cleanup. She's done great work on reporting, including helping send daily reports to Cali, PA and Cal OES about the emergencies that may be happening that day. And this is vital. Communication is one of the most critical parts of emergency response. I really value how organized she is and how self-directed. She's a great problem solver and really takes the time to get up to speed on technical issues as needed. Next, I'll turn to Sean Richards. He works on drinking water topics. For example, helping drinking water systems communicate their needs to Cal OES. He helps us track boiled water notices and ensures that the service area boundaries we have for drinking water systems are useful and accurate. He's been our lead for the Fort Bragg mission task and has coordinated drought response calls on the Russian River with water rights. He's amazing at breaking down silos and being super diplomatic. I appreciate how he reduces the tension and stress in a lot of high stakes meetings. I'll turn now to Crystal Taylor, who's working on forest resilience and wildfires, and also a lot of the infrastructure we use for the whole program. Our SharePoint site, our WaterNet site, a document that explains the roles and responsibilities of the emergency management program in contrast with other parts of the water board. She also is a content expert who has got up to speed on 401 permits for the recent work on waivers and coordinates with water quality issues, for example, on the Feather River. With Sean, she works on GIS and resource sharing, including sharing data among BDOs and with Cal OES and others as needed. She's hugely responsive and has built some really strong relationships with regional board staff, and we can always rely on her to get the right people together to solve a problem. Victor Lopez has also worked on the management of our water board staff who have volunteered to support Cal Recycle. For drought, he's worked on water hauling, how to get the water where it's needed. And he's led and helped train on drought-related funding processes and options, which has been very helpful as we try to figure out a really complicated area. He works with wastewater as well, dealing with sewage overflows and being sure we have a good list of wastewater treatment plant contacts. His approach to work is highly adaptive, even as the work has shifted. He's really great at just jumping in and finding ways to help. Also really good with interagency coordination, reflecting some of his unique perspectives, having worked at Cal Recycle and also at several programs within the water board. Mark Baer works on spill reports. These are real-time updates that need to be understood and routed. The oil spill and invasive species, backup on supporting the staff who are supporting Cal Recycle, working on the emergency management programs, training and development efforts, and wildfire. He's able to do all this because he's got 20 years experience in this area. We can say with confidence he's seen it all, but he has great suggestions and is really great under stress, and he helps other people focus. And finally, I'll turn to Sarah Rees, our supervisor, played an early and founding role in the program along with Katie Landau, moved into the program when it was formed and is now leading it. I rely on her to be calm and patient and thoughtful, and she's a big part of why the team is so effective.
Thank you, James. Are any of the team here? And otherwise, I have to just acknowledge that this is one of our newer teams here at the board, actually, only here a few years old, and one of our most critical, certainly, as we all face the climate crisis, because as James said, whether it's drought, whether it's wildfires or floods, these are the folks that are making sure that we are prepared beforehand, which is so much of the work, is communication and preparedness, so that when the emergency is upon us, regrettably, we're able to act. And the fact that we didn't have a unit dedicated to this work prior just shows how much we have to do, and just so proud of the work that has gone on. And just this last summer as an example of the real value add by being able to better coordinate amongst all our sister agencies, but importantly with local communities, and make sure that we are being our best agency and best selves, if you will, in the face of these emergencies in communities that we know will only grow more frequent, unfortunately. So just thank you incredibly for the work you're all doing here. It is so central to everything that we're doing right now. And again, you look back at this summer, and we just have a lot to be thankful to you for. So keep up the incredible work, certainly, and just thank you. Virtual clap here for you. Awkward, I know that we're not able to be more in person here, but look forward to celebrating you all in person as well as we get back to in-person meetings and get to seeing you all in the building. So just thank you incredibly. And thank you, James, for the 2 nominations. Next, we have our last award, and I'd like to call up Director from the Division of Financial Assistance, Joe Karkowski. Good to see you this morning, Joe.
Good morning, Chair Escobar, members of the board. So I'm excited to present a Superior Accomplishment Award to one of our technical assistance teams. So team, go ahead. If you have a camera, turn your cameras on and I'll introduce you all. So leading is Kim Din. Hi, Kim. So she's the senior engineer in charge. And then we have David Chan, Emma Blankenship, Ibiang Rivera, and Zoe Wu. So for those in the audience who don't know what technical assistance is, they help out small disadvantaged communities with their various water projects. So we focus a lot on drinking water, but also wastewater, and we have stormwater and groundwater TA as well. So that can go from income surveys, which are done to see if a community qualifies for grant funding if they're economically disadvantaged, to full planning and design. And they work a lot on consolidations, community engagement, legal services, those sorts of things, oftentimes coordinating amongst a variety of TA providers to help a given community. They work a lot, collaborate a lot with our Division of Drinking Water on water projects, the regional boards and other agencies. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, even though our TA providers are carrying out the actual planning and design. So this year, as like with a lot of folks, is super challenging doing a lot of this remotely. And they not only did their core work really well, so had over 200 technical assistance work plans that they reviewed and we approved, including 34 that were full planning work plans. And for those of you who don't know, we usually have done planning agreements, which can take a long time. And these planning work plans, we do the same work, same consulting firms help out engineering firms, but it's much more streamlined. So in addition to introducing that process and moving it along, they developed a new backup generator program. So as you know, with the wildfires, there are a lot of public safety power shutoffs, and we have a lot of small water systems that don't have backup power, and that can lead to a water outage. So they've stood up that program really quickly. We're executing those agreements. Took a lot of coordination with DDW, doing some great analysis to figure out where the highest risk water systems were. So we're hoping to, it's really kind of a pilot effort. We're hoping to help out about 40 systems through that program. The other thing, you'll hear about it later, the arrearages program. So even though DDW and our cleanup fund staff are kind of leading the charge there, the TA group stepped up, working with our TA providers to help small systems who, of course, are very confused by what all that means, the whole arrearages program, and so stepped up to develop work plans, establish a budget, tasks to help out those systems with the application and responding to the survey and all of that work that goes into the arrearages program. The other things they've done, they're working a lot on streamlining, so develop some new guidelines for determining median household income and income surveys. That was part of this team, and other parts of our team in DFA were working on that. So helping that process move a lot more smoothly, because that can be kind of a barrier to our decision making if we don't know what the economic status of a community is. They've also, they're noticing that sometimes applications weren't being done quite completely and thoroughly enough. Even with some of those TA providers we've worked with a lot. So they developed some guidance and held a number of trainings and workshops so we could all get on the same page and smooth out that process. The team includes Kim, came over to us from CDPH, so one of the great leaders we got from that group, all the way to Emma, who joined us during COVID. So I don't know if she's ever actually seen her cubicle or not, but she's been doing a great job along with the other team members. So anyway, I wanted to thank them all. We all, I think board members, executive management, myself, we are beneficiaries of all the hard work that they do. And so any credit or acclaim we get is reflected from that great work, awesome work that they've been able to do along with our various partners. So thank you very much, team. And Kim, I don't know, did you want to say a few words?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Joe, and thank you, board members. Today, actually, I want to thank my staff for all of their hard work that they have been carrying out for the last year and a half, especially during COVID. They have the heavy workload, as everybody knows, the needs for drinking water, safe drinking water, and affordable drinking water is great. And with the heavy workload, they still continue discussing ways to improve the technical assistance program, to streamline, to make things move faster and align with the regular funding and board members and the division's goals. The next thing I want to do is thanks our management for supporting the program, for supporting our day-to-day work and recognize our efforts to help disadvantaged communities addressing their drinking water issues. Mostly, that's where the needs are the greatest. And thirdly, but not last, I want to thank our technical assistance providers, because without them, our technical assistance program won't be successful. They have been working very diligently and hard at helping disadvantaged communities to navigate through funding, to do planning, getting ready to for their construction projects. So that's all I have.
And it's an incredible amount. Just thank you, Kim, for your great leadership and your teams here, and Joe for nominating and acknowledging the team here, and everyone here that is presented today, but all of our staff. It has been a difficult time here. This remote work has its challenges, and as Joe pointed out, with Emma here even, and I know many other colleagues that were hired here at the work during COVID haven't really had the benefit of real, face-to-face teamwork. And again, it has been a challenging time with COVID, but then also drought. and the other emergencies that we're experiencing. And that is felt in communities, and particularly small systems in our communities throughout the state. So your work is so incredibly important, and just want to acknowledge, and so thankful we have a moment to acknowledge your day-to-day commitment to all of this. As Joe said, we're here beneficiaries of the hard work that you put in day to day, and truly here as an institution, it's that continuum of work between us all. But importantly, you're the ones having to manage what are difficult schedules and continue the coordination that is more difficult without being in person, but still so critical to all this work, particularly in our communities. And so, I think folks sometimes forget that about 95% of water is served by about 400 agencies, but we oversee nearly 3,000 community water systems. And so it leaves a lot to be needed to be accounted for when it comes to these smaller systems. And so this dedicated team is just such a critical part of the work that we do. So thank you all for that passion and commitment. And we're here to always be supportive of and figure out how we continue to best deliver this much needed relief and services to our most disadvantaged communities here in the state. So just thank you. And round of applause, virtual applause.
So Chair Esquivel, one more quick thing I want to highlight. So David Chan is getting used to getting awards. So last year, he was named Chief Noodle Officer of Nissan Foods because of his dessert ramen, right? Did I get that right? That's what you won it for, David?
I remember seeing that, David,
yeah.
And being so incredibly proud of you, yeah. and that you were here at the board. So yeah.
So I'm sure everybody else on Kim's team has equivalent skills in other areas, but David, I think it was actually a national contest too. So it was pretty darn impressive. So we'll have to have an info item from David at some point on how to make really great ramen.
This is a household that's a fan of ramen too. My partner, we're soft boiling eggs last night for our ramen meal. So I think here, Joe. I think we definitely should have David do that.
Right,
thank you. Anyone would like to say anything further? By all means. Okay. Well, great. Thank you again, Joe. Thank you, team, and thank you for everyone here. Again, it is not lost on me just how incredibly difficult a time it can be right now. And the fact that the board has continued its core missions and work and advanced it in this time is not lost on me. It's been because of the dedication of you all out there. So thank you. And thank you everyone for the time here to allow us to present these awards. It means a lot. Okay. With that, we can then move on to public forum. I believe we have 2 speakers for public forum, and our first speaker, I believe, is Ignacio Dairyt. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity. I was hoping I would ask for that ramen recipe, but I'm here for something a bit more serious than that. I'm here to request the State Board to prioritize the resolution of a fundamental problem with Cal EPA's and the State Board's approach to the draft vapor intrusion guidance. My name is Ignacio Dairyt, and I'm the lead program consultant for the Center for Creative Land Recycling, or CCLEAR. For the last 22 years, we have been the only nonprofit dedicated to the sustainable reuse of underutilized properties. Before CCLEAR, I was a redevelopment project manager for the city of Emeryville, where I worked on sustainable urban infill projects for 21 years and collaborated with others nationally and internationally. At both CCLEAR and Emeryville, State Board resources and policies, such as the USD Cleanup Fund, the Orphan Site Cleanup Fund, and the Site Cleanup Subaccount, were prominent in the reuse of many sites. I have a couple of sites I use myself to clean up a couple of gasoline stations, which are now, if you've been in Emeryville, where the Home Depot and on San Pablo is. So thank you for this foresight to create these programs. We've helped a lot of cities as well use these funds for redevelopment projects, infill projects. And so we work with cities, nonprofits, community stakeholders, and developers to create resilient, sustainable, and livable communities. We are in the business of delivering lasting solutions to some of the state's most pressing problems: the housing crisis, the climate crisis, and the environmental justice crisis. Inadequate housing, affordable housing stock, and poor access to basic services and amenities exacerbate isolation and vulnerability to climate change. The lack of affordable housing in California's urban centers creates sprawl by forcing more workers to become commuters and will make it impossible to attain California's 2030 and 2045 emissions reductions goals. So the solution is straightforward: build more housing, build it close to transit, build amenities, and build it now. So why am I telling the state board members this, you might ask? Well, because in California, infill sites are only available as a consequence of their impaired environmental condition, such as Emeryville. These are the types of sites which, for more than 2 decades, I helped reuse in Emeryville, and which CClear has been helping get redeveloped across the country with immediate and significant community benefits and no evidence of negative health consequences. In California, if California is serious about tackling the state's housing, climate, and environmental justice crises, then these successful ventures must continue. While our state legislature has passed land use policies and federal and state agencies are providing incentives toward these goals, which are being touted this week at the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, our own environmental agencies are stalling this momentum. Cal EPA, in collaboration with the State Board and the San Francisco Regional Water Board, is developing new vapor intrusion guidance meant to improve protection of public health at brownfield sites. However, Cal EPA's own DTSC has determined that the foundation of the draft guidance that is already being implemented as if it were state regulation is flawed because it relies on outdated information obtained mostly from sites outside California, where there is much greater potential for vapor intrusion. And the pending resolution of this attenuation factor issue, which has been in limbo since June 2020, further progress to mitigate the housing, climate, and environmental justice crisis will be stalled or reversed. We have seen evidence from around the state that this impasse has been a major barrier for housing projects, especially projects for low-income families, by increasing development costs and timelines and causing greater uncertainty about project feasibility. Local agencies, which have fewer resources and technical capabilities than state agencies, tend to apply even more restrictive measures. These dynamics are the death sentence for affordable housing projects. If nothing is done to resolve this issue, then thousands of brownfield sites that could have been remediated and safely reused for affordable housing will be passed over because available grant funding will be exhausted on a relatively few handful of sites. This will result in more sprawl, more expensive housing, more air and water pollution, more infrastructure costs, more freeway deaths, more environmental injustices. I hope this is not the intent of the board. I hope the board directs its staff to immediately begin a transparent discussion to resolve the vapor intrusion issue. As a next step, we ask that the state board work with Cal EPA and follow the most up-to-date peer-reviewed science developed by its own DTSC. More specifically, Cal EPA should update its draft vapor intrusion guidance document to incorporate the results of the peer-reviewed DTSC vapor intrusion study. The guidance should also prioritize use of site-specific data rather than one-size-fits-all default estimate to determine vapor intrusion potential. Finally, we ask that the state board provide information to stakeholders indicating how it will implement the Cal EPA guidance in the context of its existing site cleanup programs. Housing, climate change, and environmental justice are hanging in the balance, and as the world leaders reiterate in Glasgow, time is not on our side. Thank you in advance for your help and your leadership on this critical issue.
Thank you, Mr. David. I really appreciate you taking the time and flagging this for the board. I've been lightly tracking the vapor intrusion guidance that Cali PA has been working with us and our sister agencies on. I know the intent there is to make it more clear and protective and easy to be able to ensure that we are reusing these properties. And as you noted, with our cleanup funds and various programs, very interested in ensuring that we're cleaning up legacy pollution challenges in our communities in ways that allow us to infill, as you said, and really be able to maximize our usage of land as much as we are here concerned about the maximization of the usage of water. So really appreciate that and appreciate the flag. I'll be wanting to follow up further. So thank you. Next, I would like to call up Gary Becker, and I believe he is our last public forum speaker.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman,
Good morning.
members of the board. Nice to see you all, even if only virtually. My name is Gary Becker. I'm the program director at the Bay Institute. And the reason that I wanted to speak today was in regard to the letter that Secretaries Blumenfeld and Crowfoot sent to San Joaquin Valley tributary water district managers on October 20th regarding their decision that voluntary agreement negotiations on the San Joaquin tributaries were no longer viable, and indicating that they were going to ask the State Water Board to move forward with implementation of the Phase 1 amendments to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. So that sort of brings up 4 or 5 points that I wanted to make briefly. The first is just to express our appreciation to the secretaries for what must have been a difficult decision to reorient their efforts, based on the lack of progress, and we support the recommendation that the board move forward with implementing the San Joaquin inflow and Southern Delta objectives that you adopted in December 2018, and would ask that you place on your agenda at the earliest possible convenience public discussion of the steps that you would take to do that. However, we are concerned about the board's failure to move forward on completing Phase 2 of the update of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan in the 3 years since you amended it to adopt the Phase 1 water quality objectives. And that brings up a couple of other points. The secretaries indicated that they would continue to pursue voluntary agreement negotiations with the Sacramento Basin and Delta export interests. We all wish them the best of luck on that. But that should not be a reason to preclude the board moving forward with efforts to complete Phase 2 of the Water Quality Control Plan update. Clearly, negotiations and regulatory action by the board can proceed on dual tracks. It's clear because in the letter I'm referring to, they were referring to negotiations that occurred for nearly 3 years after this board amended the Water Quality Control Plan. So there's absolutely no reason to defer movement on Phase 1 because of negotiations that are occurring between the state and those parties. So in a related point, whatever good faith efforts occur between the state and Sacramento Basin and Delta export interests, we all know that there is no guarantee that those good faith efforts will lead to either a negotiated agreement or an agreement that is sufficient to meet the board's purposes. In December of 2018, Directors Bonham and Nemeth came before this board, described agreement in concept between the state and San Joaquin tributary interests, on voluntary agreement and predicted that in early 2019 they'd have a package to bring to you. Well, nearly 3 years later, that's obviously not the case. So, you know, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So I think that, again, it's the responsible and smart thing to do to complete phase 2. And if there is a successful negotiated agreement that meets your needs, then obviously you can address it at that time. And I have shown that your regulatory actions generally allow for inclusion of appropriate agreements. You know, the final point I want to make here is that whatever the status of voluntary agreement negotiations, that the board has a responsibility. The State Water Board has acknowledged that fish and wildlife beneficial uses are not being adequately protected by the current objectives in the Water Quality Control Plan. That's on you. You have a responsibility to do something about that. And in order to make sure that those fish and wildlife beneficial uses are not being degraded or extinguished, which is a real possibility, then you need to complete phase 2 at the earliest possible time. You've had 3 years since the amendments to phase 1 to do that, and the progress has simply not been really acceptable. So I urge you to take steps to complete phase 2, and I ask you to place on the agenda for public discussion what steps are necessary to achieve that at the earliest possible time. So I'll end there. Thank you for the time, and again, good to see you all.
Thank you for your time, Gary, and good to hear you and appreciate your comments this morning. Thank you. With that, I think we are done with public forum and we can enter into board business. And I think the first item of business is board meeting minutes from the previous board meeting.
Move for adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Lawfer, can you please call the roll call vote?
Sure, I can do that. Let's begin. Who was the motion by?
Yeah.
Sorry, Member Firestone. Member Firestone?
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo?
Aye.
Member McGuire?
Aye.
Member Morgan?
Aye.
And Chair Esquivel?
Aye. Thank you, Mr. Lawfer. I appreciate that. I know Ms. Townsend is out, and if there's someone else that wants to call the roll call vote next time, I can just call on them. So thank you. And with that, we can move on to our tranche now of informational items. And I believe the first that we have up is, in fact, our drought update and current hydrologic conditions update. Mr. Ekdahl, good to see you. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. Let's see, I think we have a presentation and we'll largely kick things off once we get the presentation up by turning it over to staff from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation and Department of Water Resources. So if we go to the next slide. A quick note that there was a statewide extension of the drought proclamation on October 19th, and then kind of the overview of what we'll be talking about next. We'll do the watershed specific updates and then talk a little bit about drinking water and Division of Financial Assistance. And so we'll start with the Bay Delta, and I believe with that, hand it off to our colleagues at USBR and DWR, who I believe should be online.
Good morning, Ms. White.
Hi, good morning. Excellent. Good morning, Chair Esquivel, Vice Chair Diadamo. I'm Molly White and board members. I'm Molly White, Water Operations Manager for the State Water Project with the Department of Water Resources. And Kristen White and I from Reclamation. Kristen, the Operations Manager for the Central Valley Project. Together we'll be providing a hydrology and project operations update. There we go. All right, great. Next slide, please. So first I want to start off with just a brief recap of conditions that we have been facing just prior to the significant storms that came into Northern California a little over a week ago. Some key highlights. So from a statewide precipitation aspect, water years 2020 and 2021 were the driest 2-year period on record. We were facing extreme soil moisture in the watersheds. Delta salinity conditions were slightly elevated. The State Water Project and Central Valley Project were at minimum exports, and there was partial closure of the Delta Cross Channel gates for Rio Vista flow requirements under D1641. Next slide. But then we had these great storms that came in a little over a week ago. The graphic there to the left is the 7-day observed precipitation totals from October 18th through October 25th. So the pink is about 10 inches or so. So we did see quite a bit of rain on the North Coast and Northern Sierras. And then down in the valley, the yellow, about 4.5 inches or so across the valley. The storms themselves didn't extend too much into Southern California, as that purple is really just a trace amounts down into Southern California. But then if we look over at the slide to the graphic to the right is a 24-hour precip. And on Sunday, the 24th of October. And that's when we really saw the big storm come in and really pack a punch as far as for precipitation totals and so forth. Again, majority of the rain for that 7-day period did fall on that one day. And there again, we saw some locations and gauges in the Feather River up to 10 inches in that 24-hour period. So definitely a welcome throughout the whole Sierra and to see that rain come in. And next slide, please. So here's some fun facts that were put out by the National Weather Service. The slide there, the 1 year versus the 1 day. So there on the left is water year 2021, and it shows the total precip that fell over the course of the entire water year in comparison to the 24-hour period that we saw at certain locations throughout the valley. So for example, or in Northern California, so for example, they're at Sac Exec Airport. In 24 hours, they received nearly 82% of the rainfall of what was received in the entire water year. Blue Canyon, about 32%, Oroville, about 52%, just in that 1 day period of time. And then the graphic to the right just highlights some of the all-time records, 24-hour records that we saw on that date. So downtown Sacramento, Sac Exec Airport, and then Blue Canyon, which is 10.4 inches of rainfall in that period. So next slide, please. So as far as the post-storm, as I mentioned, we've had very dry antecedent conditions in our watersheds. There was reservoir storage gains throughout the system, but the runoff itself was limited just because of those dry soils and so forth throughout the system. Lake Oroville did see a decent increase of inflow. So just over the past week or so, we have received about 180,000 acre feet of storage gained in the reservoir in about 30 feet. So that's great. And Kristen will talk a little bit more about the storage conditions and so forth post these storms. Again, we had the soil moisture deficit. It's greatly improved from those storms. However, if we do see dry patterns, a shift back to dry patterns, we may lose some of that soil moisture that was gained. But right now, forecasts, at least in the next 6 days, we still have some unsettled weather out there and looking to see at least maybe an inch or two throughout northern Sierra. And then we are in the process of decreasing our reservoir releases because of these storm events that we've seen. For Oroville, we expect to be down to minimum releases to conserve storage in the next few days. Delta conditions have vastly improved, and with that, both projects have been able to increase exports to maximum to take it to increase southern storage in San Luis Reservoir. And next slide, we'll kick it off to Kristen.
Great, thanks Molly, and thanks to the board members for having us here. It's so much more pleasant to talk to you when there's precipitation to talk about. Okay, so we have our 8th station index, which is what captured the majority of the rain from that recent storm event. You can see that sharp vertical line there in the 3rd week of October. That's representing the storm that Molly just talked about. This graph was from a few days ago. As of today, it's 13.3 inches for the 8th station index. You may not think there's a huge difference between 12.6 and 13.3, but it does put us above that 2017 line. So technically, as of today, we have more more rain in the 8th station index than we had at this same time in 2017, our wettest year on record. So that's something exciting. Unfortunately, October is really not a predictor of the rest of the year, and we've certainly had above average Octobers that were followed by years that turned out to be critical. So it's exciting, but not predictive. Next slide. All right, this is just going through the other parts of the system. We have the San Joaquin Valley system at about 6.6 inches, also similar to what we saw in 1983, the wettest year on record for that gauge. Next slide. And then finally in the Tulare Basin, 2.6, which is low, but still above average for that area. As Molly mentioned, most of that area did not receive significant precipitation from the October 24th storm. Next slide. So it's really exciting to see that rainfall. However, unfortunately, this doesn't change our reservoir conditions back into a good spot. It definitely improves them from where they were, but they're still mostly well below average. You can see, and we'll go through the actual storages at each reservoir in a minute, but you can see Shasta and Trinity are still in the 40s. Oroville just bumping up into the 50% of average, which is pretty big considering they were at their lowest reservoir storage in history. Folsom getting to 72%. I looked as of this morning, it was closer to 76%. So that's exciting, giving us some hope that we might have decent storage if this year doesn't turn out to be dry later in the year. And then below average at most of the other reservoirs. Next slide. All right, so let's see what the storm brought for each of the reservoirs. So we've got, starting at Trinity, didn't see a huge response at Trinity, about 16,000 acre feet. As of this morning, got about 4,000 acre feet more, so about 20,000 acre foot response. Which given that reservoir, it's good to see it start going back up. As you can see, I've graphed it here with some of the other drought years, as well as 2017 and last year for perspective. We typically in the drier years, we don't see Trinity start going up at this time period. We don't see it start going up until some of the bigger winter storms. So it's exciting to see it turn around, and we'll see similar results at some of the other reservoirs. Next slide. This is, and then so moving to Shasta, similar story, did not see a huge response here. It's about 35,000 acre feet storage gain. We're pretty similar to that as we've got some runoff coming in towards the end of the storm, but we're also ramping down our releases to minimums, and we won't get there until about the middle of November. So we're not seeing as much of the storage gain right now at Shasta. And the storm is really more focused on Oroville and Folsom or American River and Feather River watersheds. So that's where we saw the biggest bump. Next slide. All right, so then we have Oroville, which, you know, not that it's a competition, but they won the storm. They were at 170,000 acre feet. I think as of this morning, they're over 180. So that's pretty exciting. You can see some of the other drought years. Even 2017 didn't have a bump up like that. So that's a real exciting jump to see there, and happy for DWR and for the system as a whole with that. All right, and next slide. And then we have second runner-up Folsom, which is it was 91,000 acre feet, but as of this morning I looked and we're over 100,000 acre feet now, so that's exciting. I think we got about 13,000 acre feet additional in the last few days. Folsom is at its minimum, so it's able to capitalize on that storm event, and you can see that it's bringing us back up to where we started the previous drought years. 2014 and 2015. So very positive news for Folsom. And next slide. And then finally we have New Melones, which sadly was in last place for benefiting from this storm. The storm certainly focused more further north, so we didn't see much response at all at New Melones. Next slide. Sorry, I have vocal coworkers. Okay, and so the last slide, this is the seasonal outlooks. This is looking November through January. This doesn't tell us a lot, but what it does say is that there's not a strong predictor of whether it will be wet or dry. So it gives us a little bit of hope that we might be going into a wet winter, similar to how we started with banner Octobers before, but it also says there's a decent chance that we're going to be going into a dry year, especially in Southern California, which is where the only real strong signal is. So I think this supports our general plan of hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Molly to talk about what's coming up.
All right, so next slide, please. Excellent. So thank you, Kristen. So our planned operations now, through early fall, early winter time period is do our best to get our upstream reservoirs down to minimums, like Kristen mentioned. Shasta's headed that direction here in the next couple of weeks, and Oroville plan to be there by the end of the week. Maintain those releases to meet our Delta requirements and conserve water upstream. Down in the Delta, just expect to modify our exports to meet Delta requirements and fisheries protections as needed, and then just export available water to build our San Luis storage for next year. Next slide. And lastly, as Kristen had mentioned, and this is great news with this storm, we're certainly off to a great start at the beginning of the water year, but we're still looking forward and planning conservatively, looking forward to 2022. So our next steps and our current steps, coordinating with our state and federal agencies, water users, and stakeholders. We do have extremely low storage, again, carryover storage this year. So with that in mind, we're continuing that conservative 2022 drought year planning. And with that, both Reclamation and DWR are in the process of developing a temporary urgency change petition with the plan submittal to the board on December 1st. And then again, we'll be here as needed to continue to provide these hydrologic and project operations updates. And that is my last slide. The next slide is our drought website. There we go.
Thank you both so much. Really appreciate you joining us today and providing an update here. Definitely seems, you can see the storm had a bit of a narrow band, certainly seeing as how New Melones to the south and Shasta to the north here really didn't get the benefit of the fire hose, but at least Folsom and Oroville certainly did. And I think of the Russian River watershed as well. I know Eric will likely cover some of that, but brought definite relief to at least the band that was there. So thank you, I much appreciate it. Any questions from fellow board colleagues here? Okay, seeing none. Thank you both again. And Mr. Ekdahl.
Great. So we'll continue on with our drought update and hydro update. We usually update on these two additional reservoirs and note that Kachuma is at about 48% of capacity or 67% of the long-term average. And Diamond Valley is at about 76% of capacity. Next slides, please. I'll jump right in and talk a little bit more about the curtailment status. The storm, as you can imagine, did change how we're looking at curtailments, at least for the time being. In the Delta watershed, we did temporarily suspend all curtailments on October 20th. This was in advance of the storm. We basically were able to run the numbers from the California-Nevada River Forecast Center that showed an increase in stream flow, suggesting that we would be able to lift these curtailments. As of right now, these continue to be suspended. And we, I believe, ran the numbers yesterday, again, supporting that we keep the curtailment suspended for at least another week. We update weekly, if not more so, depending on storms that come in. And we update through our LIRIS and put the information on our website. So again, folks, stay tuned on kind of these weekly updates going forward. By all indications, we may continue to keep these suspended for some time. This storm, at least in the northern part of the Delta watershed in the Sacramento, appears to have significantly wetted the system. And at least in November and December, demands are relatively low, although storage demands are somewhat tricky to calculate sometimes. But we continue to look optimistically at kind of the next couple of weeks. In addition, we lifted Term 91 on October 26th. This was 2 days after the bigger storm. I'll show that graph in the next slide. In early November, we do plan on updating the water unavailability methodology report. We did have a staff level workshop on October, I believe it was 20th, and we do plan on making some updates to the report accordingly and releasing that for the public. We also do have a tentative date of December 15th to hold another staff technical workshop on alternative curtailment methodologies. This was a item that was in the adoption resolution when we adopted the emergency regulations for the Delta watershed back in August. There was a line that basically directed staff to work with stakeholders and other agencies to look at whether or not there were other curtailment approaches for the Delta watershed, something that's like a Term 91 approach or something similar, or other approaches altogether. And we're looking to hold that on December 15th. We'll have a formal notice that goes out in the next couple of weeks. And then as always, compliance status update is available on our website. Next slide, please.
Just quickly, Mr. Echdal, I just want to thank the great work I know folks are doing almost on a daily basis and running the model, taking the forecast data from the California-Nevada Forecast Center and incorporating it and figuring out, are we able to lift curtailment? Can we, and do so even beforehand off of projected inflows? So just want to note that work going on and just thank folks for being so just on top of it.
A huge thanks to staff, Connie Mitterhofer and her team for continuing to kind of oversee this effort. It is a lot of work and kind of daily updates and check-ins, and so huge appreciation for those staff as well. This is the Term 91 graph. You can see right now that dark blue line towards the left side. That dip down is basically the outcome of the storm, where we went from supplemental project releases to excess water in the system. We're watching and seeing whether or not Term 91 remains in effect. There can sometimes be a pretty sharp recession in terms of overall stream flow, and I'll show some slides for the Russian River in a bit that illustrate that. So for now, Term 91 looks like it's not in effect, and it may remain that way for some time, but we do need to keep watching it, just like the curtailments, to see if conditions trend drier and what the outcomes of that are. Next slide, please. A quick update on Mill and Deer Creeks. Curtailment drought minimum flow requirements became effective on October 15th, and minimum passage flows were achieved shortly or almost immediately thereafter. So we've seen 50 cubic feet per second on both Mill and Deer Creek since October 15th. CDFW was out there and did document adult steelhead and fall run Chinook entering both creeks soon after passage flows were attained. A quick update on that bullet immediately above. We did observe apparently yesterday flows below 50 CFS. And so we're taking some steps to try and bring those back up to make sure that we're maintaining the 50 or the minimum in-stream flows going forward. And as of a couple days ago, we had 9 out of 22 entities that had completed their online certification forms. Next slide, please. A little bit more on the Russian River. As of right now, 88% of right holders who have received a curtailment order have completed the response surveys. I'll show a slide in a little bit when we talk about enforcement about what that is in terms of volume. There was a request at the last drought update to show you what does response mean in terms of volume. Sometimes the numbers are hard to parse out, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We have in the Russian River 96 certifications submitted about health and human safety, 22 petitions. We've reviewed, I think, almost all of those petitions. We maybe have about 5 left that we haven't gotten to yet. About 450 notices of violations were issued and over 80 inspections. And again, that kind of interactive response tracker is available on our website. Next slide, please. What did the storm do in the Russian River? This is kind of a sequential or almost in hydrologic order response based on some of the stream gauges in the Russian River. The red dot is highest up in the watershed closest to Lake Mendocino. The kind of teal blue dot is Healdsburg down at the lowest part of the upper Russian River watershed. We saw prior to the storm flows about 40 to 50 cubic feet per second. But during the peak of the storm on October 24th, flows ranging 9,000 up by Lake Mendocino, all the way up to 17,000, almost 18,000 at Healdsburg. So a huge increase in flow, multiple orders of magnitude. But then already by a couple of days later, at least if you look at Talmadge or Hopland, you go from about 10,000 down to about 290. So there's a pretty sharp drop off, although it's still considerably or a lot better than where we were before the storm altogether. Next slide, please. We can look at what that means in terms of storage in Lake Mendocino. The emergency regulations were kind of keyed off of a specific storage level in Lake Mendocino. And the Calpella gauge, which is right below the lake, and it's the gauge that's used in the emergency regulations, is kind of the gauge of measure. Saw a peak flow of about 4,000 on October 24th, but already it's dropped down to about 72. I think if we looked yesterday, inflow into the upper lake is about 32 from the East Fork of the upper Russian River. Reservoir storage before the storm was about 13,000 acre feet. That had already come up a little bit from some of the smaller storms beforehand. And on the 27th, reservoir storage was about 17,000. It's gone up a little bit since then also. But you can see over the course of 2 years, this is a graph that extends back October 2019. And you can see the peak storage there in December of 2019, roughly maybe early January, was almost 80,000 acre feet. And it's gone down since then. And that little red blip at the end is what we saw in terms of this storm. So a huge sigh of relief, maybe, but we shouldn't be sighing in relief too much. We're still at a very, very low point in this reservoir. Last year, I pointed this out. I think I said at the last board meeting, it rose 5,000 acre feet. The actual number is 10,000 acre feet over the course of last water year. That was just to get us to about 37,000 acre feet of storage. We're still below 20,000 acre feet of storage, and we have a long, long ways to go. And if we kind of look collectively at some of the other reservoirs, I know that our colleagues at USBR and DWR showed similar slides. If we go to the next slide, to kind of look at from a longer term perspective over the course of the last 2 years, this is Shasta Reservoir. You can see that little red blip at the end. If you go to the next slide, this is Oroville, definitely a larger response there. But again, compared to March of 2020, a long ways to go. And I think that if you look at the Oroville or total storage capacity in Oroville, it actually goes up by another 1 million acre feet on the x-axis or y-axis rather. Next slide, please. Folsom Lake, again, a stronger response there. And next slide, New Melones, you can see maybe a little response there at the end. So again, it's great to be we are definitely in a much better position than we were prior to this storm. And this storm is really going to help in terms of just wetting up the system and kind of stopping the loss, if that makes any sense. But by no means are we out of the woods. And looking at our depleted storage conditions, we are still in a very severe drought situation that's going to require very careful management and response over the next year. Next slide, please. A little bit more on Scott and Shasta rivers as well. I'll try to go through this quickly. We did also lift curtailments in the Scott on October, we lifted them on the 29th. Actually, no, that's not true. We lifted them on the 21st through October 31st, and we've actually now extended them through another week. In the Shasta River, we've also lifted curtailments through at least 1923. We continue in the Scott and the Shasta to have a prohibition on the use of excessively leaky ditches for livestock diversions, and we're actively reviewing and acting on petitions for human health and safety. Next slide, I'll show a little bit, some graphs here too. In the Scott River, November flow requirement of 60 CFS, that's the red line that runs across. The blue line actually shows the response. We did see a huge spike in terms of flows that kind of brought us from 7, 8, 9, 10 CFS all the way up to over 500. And it's come down a little bit since then, but still remains above those in-stream flow targets. We do believe, based on this, that we are likely to lift curtailments in the Scott for several weeks. Again, we'll have to keep watching it and we'll watch it carefully, but we may be able to lift it all the way through November, maybe even further. And we were able to observe, the note here puts 23 adult fish as of 10/18. We did get an update this morning. The number as of a couple of days ago is actually 662 adult Chinook, and that's 23 miles upstream. That's a huge success. Next slide, please. The Shasta River flow requirement for November is 150 CFS. It was 125 in October. Shasta is just a different system than the Scott, and so we did see a spike, but it's dropped down pretty quickly. We do have curtailments in place to about 1923, but based on whether or not we see some of these storm systems, we had a little one come through yesterday. We have another one maybe Wednesday into Thursday. We may actually have to issue additional curtailments in November in the Shasta. As of earlier this week, we had, or last week, about 6,600 adult Chinook. And again, we had an update this morning that's now gone up to 6,800. And that's, again, more than were observed all of last year. So again, another pretty significant success there. Next slide, please. We were able to temporarily lift some of the curtailments on the Shasta, and this is a little bit complicated slide. The teal blue line is flow observed at the Edgewood CDEX station. The green line is storage in Dwinnell Reservoir. And so you see where that spike kind of goes up. We did lift curtailments and we were able to put about 700 acre feet of water into storage into Dwinnell Reservoir, which I think is for use for Montague and some other systems downstream, and will be critically needed for them later in the year. So that was something we were able to do. I think right now we still have that curtailment lifted, but we may need to put it back in place shortly. Next slide, please. We continue water right enforcement activities, virtual and field investigations. We continue to do outreach and assistance, issue notices of violations, focusing on technical assistance and next steps. Compliance varies by watershed. If we go to the next slide. There was a question about, how are things in terms of volume? And in the Russian River, I noted earlier, there was an 88% compliance with responding to the forms and filling out the certification. Well, what does 88% mean? It means that about 98.4% of the water use or claims by volume have responded. It's actually a very small fraction by total water use that hasn't responded. And so that, again, I think is, it's a good sign. It's a positive sign that shows that we do actually get a fairly good compliance rate. And if we look at the next slide, which shows the same thing for the Delta, the numbers on the side are larger, obviously, but if we look in total just based on face value, we have about 98.9, almost 99% compliance in terms of those that have filled out their forms. What does that mean in terms of the numbers? We go to the next slide. Well, we have almost 4,000 non-compliant diverters, yet that only accounts for 1% of the total water use by volume. So most of this is very small. You can see it broken out by some appropriative applications, stat ponds, a few statements, and then a very few number of domestic registrations and some other types of water use. But I think the takeaway point here is that for the most part, people have complied with filling out those forms if we look at it just by a volumetric perspective. And then again, that's a very positive sign, and it really makes it easier to kind of help do the curtailment work going forward. I do want to note that we have seen a drop off in terms of compliance for the supplemental reporting. The largest diverters above 5,000 acre feet per year were required to kind of report prospectively in terms of what they thought they were going to divert in the month ahead. In September, we had 87, I think, % compliance, and so far in October, it's dropped down to about 65% compliance. So a reminder for folks, if they're out there listening, to please fill out those forms. And I think we do plan on some efforts to simplify those forms, make them a little bit more understandable, but that will be really helpful and critical for looking at curtailments in December, January, and whether those should remain temporarily suspended or not. Next slide, please. And so again, our typical information pages, a reminder to sign up for the LIRIS lists. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Division of Drinking Water, unless there are questions here.
Just a quick acknowledgement to the water rights holders that we've been working with in these watersheds that we have curtailments. Really impressed and appreciate the responsiveness. And as you see, the information and the data go to help us to better administer the water rights system for water rights holders here. And so the trust and the information sharing is one that I'm just really proud to see, and want to thank especially the water rights community for being responsive. And here, if there's ways that we can improve either the questions we're asking or the ways in which you're reporting the data to us, want to know, want to make it as easy as we can and make sure that we're being responsive on our side and doing our part. So just want to thank and acknowledge folks for that response rate.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Zuniga, and I work for the Division of Drinking Water. So I'm the Drought Response Program Manager. And I recently came back from a 1-week vacation, and I saw some snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains, and I saw that Austin and Dallas had lifted drought. And I come back to California, and things have improved. So maybe I should leave to vacation more often. Maybe my parental leave will cause some great things. But here's an update on what we are doing for drought. Next slide, please. So first of all, there's not a lot of change from the numbers from 2 weeks ago. So instead of redisplaying some of the same information that we had, I wanted to highlight 2 areas of interest that I really wanted to focus on and what their status is after the recent rains. So first of all, for Fort Bragg, the rains have contributed to increased Noyo River flows, and the desalination plant that we funded for the city, they've not had to use it, or they've reduced use of it as well. So that's all good news in terms of the river. And of course, Fort Bragg helps give hauled water to the area of the Mendocino coast and other businesses and other communities in that area. So the bottom line for Fort Bragg is more rain is going to be needed, but they were able to move from their stage 4 water crisis to stage 2 water warning right at the onset of the big rains. So that is certainly good news. When it comes to the upper Russian River, so we've seen, my colleagues have presented about Lake Mendocino storage. So being at just 12,000 acre feet to now over approximately 16,000 acre feet, and it's increasing, and there's more rains obviously forecasted as well. There's 8 inches received into the Ukiah Basin watershed that feeds into Lake Mendocino. But the bottom line here again is that more rain is needed to undo the effects of the drought. So really, water systems should continue to be focused on supply augmentation and more drought relief projects, even though that we have some short-term relief. I think that's the main message. The fact is that these rains don't take away from the fact that surface water sources can't potentially be relied upon in current or future dry years. So more planning and regional efforts are going to be needed to solve these problems in the Russian River and Mendocino Coast watershed. But the division plans on doing its part to ensure the long-term sustainability of these potable water supplies for the areas. Some other minor updates is just collaboration with housing and community development continues with, we have focused subgroups that are discussing different areas of our programs, what our roles and responsibilities are, and trying to figure out how we can get better collaboration and make sure that that we move forward without stepping on each other's toes and we're on the same page. And that's going to continue to develop over the next 2 weeks. We should have some more feedback from some of those meetings. And of course, we continue with doing our drought funding, identification for some of these systems. Again, just because someone has gotten out of an extreme drought situation, we're still planning on doing a project to build their drought relief and resiliency for next year, so they can use that for the following summer. There was a comment about dry wells, and I just had some statistics, didn't have time to put it on a slide. But in the last 30 days, and I did this about 2 weeks ago, there was 172 dry wells reported in California through DWR's My Dry Well site. And there was 831 dry wells reported year to date. And that was 900% almost increase from the previous year. So we're talking about some pretty big numbers. And since the reporting began, there was only 3,600 dry wells reported since 2013. So you can see that we had a sizable percentage of that amount reported just this last year. Just shows you how extreme this drought really was. Next slide. I'll leave this asked for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Zuniga. Just when we might start to see some of the data from the informational orders. I know we were trying to clean up on the back end the way that we sort of process that data, even intake it a bit. Just wondering if we can have an update on some of those improvements at one of the future board meetings, and or if there's anything to share around some of that. My desire there is because we know that there are vulnerabilities here, and we're hopeful for a wet winter, but again, all planning for a dry one. And being able to already understand and know that those informational orders were an important part of our response this last summer, where additional communities might be receiving some of those orders, or how we're kind of viewing the run up to what we again are preparing for continued dry conditions on it. Again, I just feel that the data from the informational orders, the platform that we're collecting it's all important. So just wonder if there's any update, and we can always, it can be saved for a future one if there's nothing to speak to exactly right now.
Correct. Yeah, I'm meeting with some folks about putting something together. We're looking at the data, we're making certain determinations, but yeah, I should be able to get a data focused presentation on what we've received and what we've learned, and what more there is to learn. Really, I think the more you collect data, the more you realize you don't have what you need. And certainly that is the case here as well. But I think we can get you something good for the next meeting.
Thanks, I really appreciate that. And the effort there is to help communities make sure they are for themselves assessing these questions around what their vulnerabilities are, what their supplies may be. Important again to note, as been noted earlier, about 400 agencies supply about 95% of the water to Californians, but we oversee nearly 3,000 here. And so there are a lot of these smaller communities that perhaps aren't as aware of their own vulnerabilities, and the informational orders help us all make sure that we're tracking and understanding and making sure to support the local responses that are needed here before they become absolute emergencies, and so much of the good work that's going on. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from fellow board colleagues? Okay, hearing none, we can move on to DFA. Good to see you, Ms. Oaxaca.
Good morning, Chair Escobar, members of the board. Jasmine Oaxaca, supervising engineer in the Division of Financial Assistance, and I'll be wrapping up the drought presentation this morning. Next slide. So this map shows all of our urgent projects for drought that we've committed funding to since July 1st. We're at a total of 12 projects so far. at $1.7 million. And as a reminder, we are coordinating closely still with our colleagues at the Department of Water Resources, who also received drought funding in the recent Budget Act. So we're coordinating both on urgent drought response as well as developing county level or regional scale programs to help assist those served by state smalls and domestic wells that have gone dry. Next, please. This map shows the State Water Board funded existing regional or statewide programs that could help with drought response. Many of these were set up in the previous drought a couple years back, and they're for services such as well repairs and replacements or the provision of bottled water or hauled water. There's still over $26 million available in these programs. Next, please. And taking a closer look at our programs administered by the self-help enterprises within their 8-county service area in the Central Valley, there are a number of services offered through these programs to assist with drought response. 2 of them in particular I want to call out are the dry well tanks and hauled water program and the household private well assistance program. And this chart shows the number of calls that self-help has received on a monthly basis for the past 6 months to their drought hotline. And so we see a steady increase through the summer, but I wanted to note that in October, the number of calls has declined significantly. So we're hoping to be turning a corner here with drought response needs. Next, please. And this slide summarizes our drought funding activity again since July 1st, just more in detail. But we've committed funding to 5 urgent repair projects plus 7 emergency well repair type projects through self-help enterprises program for a combined total of over $1.6 million. We've added $22.8 million to our existing regional programs through amendments, and we've provided interim solutions to 4 communities so far. This is specifically related to drought issues, providing assistance to over 3,000 people. Next, please. And then going into a bit more detail on our recent funding approvals. For urgent drought projects, we extended timelines and added funds for 2 hauled water programs, while the Shasta County program is being developed through funding from the Department of Water Resources. And then through the Self-Help Emergency Fund program, we recently approved a well repair project for Patterson Tract Community Services District. And I'll say more about that one in a few minutes. In October, we added $1.6 million in additional funding to that same Self-Help Enterprises Emergency Fund program. And then for the county program development between the State Water Board and DWR, we're in discussions with 15 interested counties. And then I just wanted to note that the State Water Board is currently working closely with Santa Cruz and San Bernardino counties to develop programs there. Next slide, please. So for today, I wanted to highlight our recent work with the Patterson Tract Community Services District, which serves a small disadvantaged community with a population of about 550 people. Back on September 30th, the CSD observed a substantial amount of sand in their water supply after a fire hydrant in the community was damaged. Their system's 2 wells were inspected, and they found that the east well's casing had been damaged. And then a few days later, on October 5th, the west well failed, likely due to drought, which caused the community to suddenly be completely out of water. On October 11th, funding was approved from the State Water Board to rehabilitate and repair both of the east and west wells via Self-Help Enterprises Emergency Fund Program, which is part of their technical assistance agreement. And then, as you can see, the teams worked day and night to ensure that the well repairs happen quickly. The repairs were in fact completed and water service was restored to the community. And then in the interim, Self-Help Enterprises was also able to supply donated bottled water to the community while the well work was being done. So this situation just illustrates the need for emergency funds to be made easily and readily accessible to drought impacted communities, and the benefit of having our third-party providers such as Self-Help administering these programs on our behalf as they're ready to work with the communities to implement solutions when these issues arise. Next, please. And then lastly, these are, again, links to some of our drought funding resources. So any questions?
Just a lot of thanks. Really appreciate the continued great work of the Division of Financial Assistance. Again, it's been I know a long and difficult summer, and having to prepare for continued difficult drought conditions here in this next year. And so just incredibly appreciative of the good work. I have no further question right now, but looking to my fellow board colleagues. Okay, and hearing none, then thank you. Really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for the good updates here. Again, drought continues to be front of mind, and a lot of preparation, discussion, and work ongoing now to prepare for next year. That wraps up item number 2 and brings us to item number 3, our water system arrearage update. And excited to be getting this update. Good to see you, Mr. Bishop.
Good morning, Chair Escobar and board members. I wanted to take a minute before we jump into this item to just emphasize that 6 months ago, this was a concept. And now here we are implementing a program of totally new approach for our agency, that the team at Division of Drinking Water, Financial Assistance, DIT and DAS have done just an amazing job of bringing this this program from a concept to a reality in such a short period of time, in such a successful way. I do want to, emphasize that we're going to be pivoting in a few months from water to wastewater, and we have a good start, and we're doing a good job, as you'll see. But I do want to remind you that this has come at a cost. We have diverted staff from inspections. We've diverted our whole underground storage tank program to be able to make these payments. Folks from all over the board have been working to get this across the finish line. And that's going to continue through the next few months. So I think they've done a great job under a really unbelievably tight time frame for a bureaucratic organization like ours to move forward and being able to make these start making these payments. So I really want to applaud their work as you look at this update. Just keep in mind that from my point of view, this was just someone's idea a few months ago, and now it's actually working. Thank you all.
Just thank you for that, and join you in the incredible, just being incredibly impressed and thankful to our folks in the program. The turnaround, I know the stress that certainly these tight timelines caused for a lot of folks, just the quick pivot to your point. I can't sing the praises enough. It is really a Herculean effort that we didn't know if we were going to be successful insofar as being able to meet these timelines, but everyone just really leaned into it. And you look at the program, this $1 billion program that is innovative, is here at the system level, is here set and already writing checks for here to deliver these funds. I just can't thank you enough and join you in that. So thank you for that, Mr. Bishop.
All right, good morning, Chair Esquivel, members of the board. My name is Jennifer Toney from the Division of Drinking Water. I'll be kicking off our update and then passing it on to our Division of Financial Assistance halfway through the slides. Next slide, please. All right, currently we are in phase 2, the application phase of our arrearage program. The application opened October 5th and will remain open until December 6th at 5 p.m. The application is open to approximately 720 community water systems that reported arrearages in our survey, our previous survey. So to assist those community water systems that are available to do the application, we hosted a public webinar on October 20th and had a successful turnout of 240 registered attendees. As of yesterday, pulled the numbers, we have 394 applications started and 184 applications submitted. We also wanted to report to the board that we have 60 communities receiving technical assistance on submittal of their application. Next slide, please. We also opened up the abbreviated survey on October 5th, 2021. And this survey is open for all community water systems that charge for water, but did not submit either their original survey or they reported 0 arrearages. We had many water systems report 0 arrearages just to decline participation. So by opening up the abbreviated survey, we are allowing these community water systems to come in, change their mind, and participate in our program. We have 12 water systems that have completed the abbreviated survey and can now access the application. So the community water systems that want to participate and come in through the abbreviated survey must submit both the abbreviated survey and the application by our deadline of December 6th. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to show you our arrearage application dashboard that one of our arrearage team members, Hung Bui, created. Currently, this is only available to State Water Board staff that have access to Modified Drinking Water Watch. But I know everyone loves charts, so I wanted to show it off. So the top figure shows the number of submitted applications, the amount of funding requested, and it also breaks it down, the funding amount between residential arrearages and commercial arrearages, along with some other helpful information. The bottom figure shows the distribution of applications submitted by water system size. So the green and the orange sections of this chart are for small water systems. So connections less than 3,300. So right now, the majority of applications coming in are from small water systems. Next slide, please. This is another figure from our dashboard, and this shows the distribution of applications submitted throughout the state. And also, if you click on one of those circles, it will pull up the water system information along with the funding requested for the arrearage program. Next slide, please. Once an application is submitted, this is the review process that it goes through before payment. So it starts out and our Division of Drinking Water arrearage team does an eligibility review and compares the numbers coming in the application with what was submitted in the survey. And when everything looks good, we pass it off to our Division of Financial team where they do their financial review and prep the paperwork to go to accounting, and then ultimately to the State Controller's Office where the warrant or check is issued. Next slide, please. And this is where I'm going to hand it off to the Division of Financial Assistance and Zube.
Thank you, Jennifer, and members of the board. It's my pleasure to be here today. My name is Nzube Okamiri. I'm currently one of the managers within the arrearages unit in DFA, here to provide a quick rundown of disbursement information as of November 1st, 2021. Currently, we have 3 units with 1 manager and 5 analysts. We've hired 3 managers and we have 6 analysts on staff, and we're recruiting for additional positions. We're working with DIT to develop additional components to our internal databases in order to ensure that we're tracking and reporting information about the incoming and outgoing disbursements accurately and consistently. We're also developing procedures as we work through the disbursement requests, so we can have a consistent methods of processing throughout all the different phases of review, as well as streamline the onboarding process for our future analysts. Next slide. Currently, staff is reaching out to the community water systems as we receive their disbursement requests and reminding them to submit the necessary wet signature documents in order to have timely processing of their requests. We are reviewing in date order as the requests come in, detailing any issues within the requests and sending the completed reviews over to accounting for processing. Due to the efforts by our accounting team, working and educating with the State Controller's Office about the needs and various intricacies of this program, the State Controller's Office was able to release our first test batch of payments to water systems. Now that we've gone through that initial cycle, once and weeded out potential interdepartmental hiccups, staff is working to ramp up that cycle to get more payments, disbursements out of the door. Next slide. Currently, we have 158 disbursement requests totaling roughly $24 million. We've reviewed 69 of those at roughly $6 million, and we are pending 54. We need documents from those community water systems. We have released 17 payments to accounting at about $1.1 million, and the State Controller's Office has issued checks, 3 checks, as our initial batch at $73,000. Within the next couple of weeks, we anticipate the State Controller's Office to issue payments for the remaining 14, as well as other ones that we send over there. That concludes my brief segment for the arrearages program. Any questions?
Just incredibly impressed. I look at these numbers, and again, to have gone from concept to actual dollars hitting now water systems, and here, on our way to ensuring that this money is dispersed before the moratorium is lifted, or at least a majority of it, or here some significant amount, is just I can't thank you enough, and I can't just stop being impressed by what you all have been able to really pull off here in such a short amount of time, and the thoroughness and the accountability within the program, and just incredibly impressed. Thank you. Looking to see my fellow board colleagues if they have any questions or comments.
I'll, echo that. Amazing, and just so grateful for all of the work that all staff are doing to respond so quickly and giving this the priority that it needs. I also just so appreciate all of the transparency here. I just feel like this is, such a model of quick and relatively innovative response to needs, and then real transparency, and as Chair Esquivel said, just so much professionalism and being thorough, but also trying to move things quickly. So really, my question is, I want to keep following, and I don't know, this is such tight deadlines. So I'm wondering, maybe if there's later on maybe as we near the deadline for early December, getting a sense of how things are. I know there's a lot of efforts by staff on outreach. I've also been trying to figure out doing things so I can support that as well. So really my question is, and maybe, this is follow-up, but just, how we can continue to get an update on implementation of this and how things are going. And then also just on the dashboards and maps, which are wonderful, just what's available or planning to be available to the public so that they can support outreach to those that maybe not participating yet.
So I'll let Jennifer start off on
Sure.
On potential for an update for the graphs and the website and the data, and then we can have a little discussion about when it would be appropriate to come back.
Okay. Yes, Board Member Firestone. Yeah, we're planning on working and reaching out to DIT to see how big a lift it would be to get the dashboard from our internal, databases to either the website or the public drinking water watch platform. So happy to give an update on that.
And I know that with the survey, there was a list that was updated really frequently on who'd submitted the survey. And so I don't know if that, I know there's another step for actually submitting the application, obviously, or updating what was submitted. And I guess I've been suggesting people use that as sort of a public list of systems for what we know and what we can share right now, as we're trying to work through things and respond really quickly, but also want to support good sharing of information so people can help support getting systems to apply. So I don't know if that's something that is updated more, continuing to be updated, or, if there's, again, this can be follow-up, but just would be great to find out what can be shared regularly with the public so we can support systems getting in this quick turnaround.
Yes, right now we have a static just Excel spreadsheet that we're updating regularly on the website so that the public can see which water systems have submitted an application and which ones have not. So
okay.
Yeah.
And how often are you able to update that for the?
We're trying to do it weekly. So I think we just did the update yesterday.
Great, thanks.
So there's always a trade-off between reporting and implementing. It takes time to put together these. I think it would be appropriate for us to come back at some date that the board thinks is the right timing. There's not a lot of time left. February is when we're trying to close this out. And so we know that December is the end of the application period. So potentially the first December board meeting or the first January board meeting, they have advantages. The first December we'll have we'll get a preview. The first January we'll know. And so, it depends on, you get more time to influence those folks if we do it in December that haven't done it, but not much, because December 6th is the end. So I'm not, depending on what you're trying to accomplish with the update, if it's mostly for general information, I would suggest the first January meeting, because then we'll know the information on how many systems and what's, if you're wanting to influence folks on that, my suggestion is that maybe we just send you an update at the end of November in a memo, so that you can see who's outstanding. Because by the time we get to the first December meeting, it'll be too late.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. Thanks. Totally appreciate that. And yeah, I think having the list on the website updated weekly is a great tool for the public to track. And I really appreciate staff supporting, working with me to figure out how I can help also. And I know OPP has been doing a lot of outreach as well as other staff. So yeah, I think having just, oh, and my other thought was just to the extent that there is the timing with the executive officer's report could be another place just to get an update if that's before, the information item. So, but thank you. This is really wonderful. I'm so excited about our ability to get this money out. Really desperately needed, and I think just an example of how this agency is really able to be nimble and step up to crises and get resources to those that need it.
So we will include in the December and January executive director's report and February, and then we'll go from there, because we might be switching at that point to wastewater and be all done with drinking water. And we'll say goodbye to our friends in DDW and welcome in the DWQ into the role.
And actually, I was going to ask that too. Just we probably don't know, but is there already some thought on timing for discussing wastewater guidelines?
So I don't think we're ready to talk about when the guidelines, but we're really focused on getting drinking water out before we start a new one with wastewater. Though our Division of Water Quality is already thinking about it and has been talking to folks in the Division of Drinking Water. So there's cross-pollination going, but I don't think we can commit to really moving things out into the public and into a process until we get our first batch done. So my expectation that we're looking at sometime after February, and we'll keep you in the loop as we make more decisions, move forward, and have ideas.
Fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Really do appreciate that. And importantly, yes, focused on the drinking water side, but it is an incredibly exciting opportunity here to be able to have and address wastewater arrearage and have a resource for it. Thank you, board member. Very good points. And it is here, our desire to see every agency that can, especially every community that can benefit from this, have their agency apply. And so what comes to mind is continuing to see, say, even with Aqua and their 400 member agencies, if there are agencies that haven't, and use some of the organizations that we work with to also help spread the word of the opportunity and really get these dollars out into our communities that are really needing it. So thank you, board member, for that. Other board colleagues, and we also have one public commenter here for the item as well that we can go to, but other board colleagues with questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, then we can go to Timothy Shaw. And Mr.
I have no comment.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Appreciate it. Then that wraps up this item. Any other direction or question or comment from folks? All right. Just again, express my incredible appreciation for the quick movement on this, and look forward to then an update and it'll be helpful again, maybe a couple of weeks before the December 6th deadline for all of us to understand who still is outstanding, and maybe with a little outreach can get them to apply and have these dollars and resources flow to their community. So thank you all. Fantastic update, and really excited for the continued work on this program. Thank you. All right, well, that concludes our item update on the water arrearage program. Let's go ahead and take a a 15-minute break. Well, let's say a 10-minute break. So we'll come back here at 11 and then continue on with the quarterly Delta Stewardship Council report and a presentation on our annual performance report. So see you all here in about 10 minutes at 11 o'clock.
I think that'd be 11:10.
I apologize. Yeah, we are already at 11. So 11:10. Thank you, Sean.
No worries.
Thank you, board member. We'll see you all at 11:10. All right, everyone. It's 11:10. We can begin to gather back and move on to item number 4, which is our quarterly Delta Stewardship Council Lead Scientist update. Good to see you, Dr. Larson.
Good to see you, Chair Esquivel and other board members. Good morning. So I have a lot of material, a lot of exciting material to share with you all today. Could I get the next slide? I'm going to provide some updates on our science action agenda process, as well as a recent independent peer review panel report that was released in August. I'll talk about current working groups and upcoming workshops, provide an update on the environmental justice efforts within the council, a brief update on what's going on with the ISB, and then I'll conclude with a couple of recent article spotlights. Next slide, please. So just starting out with the science action agenda process, first I'm going to just give you a quick reminder on what the science action agenda is and why we should care about it. The science action agenda is a collaboratively developed agenda that prioritizes and aligns science actions to address management needs within the Delta. It is drafted and updated by the Delta Science Program every 4 to 5 years and is a critical part of the broader Delta Science strategy. And I should mention that while the Delta Science Program facilitates our process, the Science Action Agenda is co-produced with stakeholder input, including a lot of input from folks within the water boards, and it encompasses priorities from different collaborative venues and entities, thereby advancing shared interests and promoting transparency and collaboration. The Science Action Agenda is used to guide science funding by the Council and many partners, and the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda resulted in over $37 million of funding Delta-wide. So this is a really critical document. Next slide, please. So the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda is the second full iteration of the Science Action Agenda, and the process of updating it is done in accordance with an adaptive management cycle, as you can see here, where the planning process involves an assessment of existing and emerging science and management knowledge gaps, collaborative identification of science actions, and all of those go into the Science Action Agenda document. That document then guides funding, and then to come around full circle, we evaluate progress in achieving those science actions, and also where the gaps lie, and communicate progress in filling knowledge gaps, and knowledge of where the gaps remain then goes into the planning process for the next update to the Science Action Agenda. So what's different for the 2022 iteration is that, first of all, in the planning stage of this cycle, we added the solicitation of management questions from the community, and this also came out of the DPIC Science Funding and Governance Initiative as a recommendation. So the goal here was to better link science actions to broader management needs. This update also involved much more stakeholder involvement than the previous iteration. There were more opportunities for engagement, including multiple online surveys and public workshops. And then the progress summary, or this summary of assessment from the 2017 to 2021 Science Action Agenda, was another new component here. Next slide. So with the help of public input here, we landed on 6 broad management needs under which science actions in the update to the Science Action Agenda lie. So these needs that we've landed on broadly relate to improving or assessing coordination of large-scale efforts across the system, monitoring, model integration and forecasting. Third, multi-benefit approaches to managing the delta as a socio-ecological system. Fourth, building and integrating knowledge on human behavior and processes. Fifth, acquiring new knowledge and synthesizing existing knowledge to support species recovery. And then sixth, assessing and anticipating the impacts of climate change. Next slide. So we had these 6 management needs, and those were curated from a set of 65 top delta management questions that also arose as a result of our initial public engagement. And then most recently in July, we held a science actions workshop to draft science actions that are responsive to those management needs and those management questions. And while we had 178 draft science actions come out of that series of workshops, or come out of that workshop, we have gotten down to 25 science actions as a result of an extensive merging process. And then we also sent out another survey with the draft science actions to participants of the workshop. So these science actions can be broadly characterized by a set of themes, including forecasting and monitoring, contaminants, the delta as a socio-ecological system, invasive species, and climate change. And I'll just hit a few highlights on these science actions. So more specifically, an example of 3 of the 25 science actions are have to do with evaluating social and ecological trade-offs of drought management actions, developing a framework for forecasting harmful algal blooms, and also developing a long-term data collection and monitoring strategy for human communities within the Delta. Next slide. So the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda is soon to be released for public comment. Look for that in mid-November, sometime around Thanksgiving. And the public comment period will be open through mid-January. So please keep an eye out for communications from the council on this and take advantage of the opportunity to comment on the draft Science Action Agenda. And then, of course, we appreciate your continued partnership in working to help us implement the final 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda. Thank you very much to all of the staff from the water boards who have participated thus far. And then finally, we anticipate releasing the final version of the Science Action Agenda by spring 2022. So next slide. With that, I'm going to pivot to a report that feels a little old to me now, but it's been a few months since I gave my last quarterly report here. So in August of this year, the Delta Science Program released an independent scientific review of the Delta Mercury Control Program Phase 1 reports, specifically pertaining to tidal marshes and open water. So just to give you some background, back in 2010, the TMDL for mercury within the Delta was established. And that one component of that TMDL was the Delta Mercury Control Program, which involves a 10-year period of assessment. So dischargers of mercury within the Delta were required to review the best available science and document how they might achieve their mercury reductions. So because these reports were commissioned by the Central Valley Regional Board, which needs to implement the TMDL, that the regional board approached the Delta Science Program and asked for an independent peer review of these Phase 1 reports. So we convened 2 panels over the course of 2 years to review the reports associated, first of all, with point source dischargers, and then most recently, non-point source dischargers, which consist of tidal marshes and open water environments. And it's the latter independent peer review report that was just released in August You could find it on the Central Valley Regional Water Board webpage. But a highlight of some of the findings from the peer review are that, first of all, upstream inputs from legacy gold and mercury mines are overwhelmingly the dominant sources of mercury and methyl mercury to the Delta. And the reports and panel found that the only way to reduce Delta mercury levels really is to reduce upstream inputs and then focus on mercury controls within the YOLO bypass. The panel found that some of the results from the tidal wetland study, which suggested that tidal wetlands are not sources of mercury, actually does contrast with previously published work and recommended reevaluation of that conclusion. Another important finding is that the YOLO bypass seasonally flooded agriculture is the largest internal source of methyl mercury to the Delta. And while some reductions in mercury are possible, they found that it's unlikely that current mercury reduction goals can be met in the YOLO bypass. And so that might result in a recommendation of revisiting targets associated with the TMDL. The panel found that urban stormwater and municipal wastewater are relatively minor sources of mercury and will easily meet their mercury reduction goals. But they also identified some data quality, data uncertainty, and monitoring issues that must be addressed in order to improve mercury tracking for those sources. And then they recommended that the tidal wetland models for methyl mercury can be improved with a more robust representation of critical mercury cycling processes and by considering climate change, land use, and population change. And they also recommended additional efforts to improve the quality and availability of input data, and then also to confirm model results. On whole, they recommended that the Central Valley Regional Board should develop a climate change adaptation framework and update the TMDL model framework and mercury load estimates in association with that climate change adaptation framework. So I thank Dylan Stern at the Delta Science Program for putting together this nice graphic that summarizes some of the findings of the review panel. And again, I encourage you to visit the Central Valley Regional Board's Delta Mercury TMDL page to find the full contents of the report. Next slide, please. Another ongoing activity is that the Delta Science Program has been partnering with the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis to chair a working group on drivers of the estuarine food supply. So I know, Chair Esquivel, that you have been a great promoter of synthesis, of data and transparency and open availability of data sources. And this is a great example of how those efforts can really feed into analyses that are sorely needed within the Delta. So there is a vast wealth of data that is relevant to understanding drivers of estuarine food webs, as well as why we've seen a collapse of those food webs since about the 1970s. This is something that the community understands relatively poorly, but is something for which synthesis has great potential to yield new insight that can reshape aspects of the way that we might be managing fish from the bottom up within the Delta. So a big part of this working group, in addition to achieving a synthesis of these data sets, is also to provide training on data synthesis techniques to community members. And in this, they've engaged with 19 participants from 9 agencies and universities to provide this training. The working group itself takes place over 3 very intensive weeks, spaced through September, October, and November of 2021. And in those weeks, participants do receive training, but then they also work to create products that are relevant to management questions, including some of the key research questions that you see here. What are the key drivers of the food supply, from plants to plankton to fish? How have invasive species shaped and affected Delta communities? And then how can restoration and flow management protect and enhance the food supply for fishes of management interest under future climate and management scenarios? Next slide. So the group has been working really hard. They just met last week for their October meeting. And we don't have products from that group just yet, but this figure was prepared as part of the prospectus for the set of workshops to show the type of products that might emerge from this working group. So what's envisioned is that this group will combine data on environmental and species abundance together with a statistical model that they would newly formulate as a product of the synthesis, looking at how drivers such as temperature, salinity, space, and seasonality impact species abundance. And then that statistical model would be combined with environmental data from future projected scenarios in order to generate predictions of species abundance and distribution. So I hope to be able to report on some of the products to come out of that group in one of my upcoming quarterly reports. Next slide, please. There are a couple of upcoming Delta Science Program workshops that I would like to get on your radar. First of all is the Salinity Management Workshop, which is actually now going to be a series of 2 workshops spread across spring and summer of 2022. Michael George is one of the participants on the planning committee, and on whole, we are trying to reach a relatively diverse set of stakeholders within the planning community. And right now that committee consists of people from at least 10 different institutions. On the council side, this effort is being led by Karen Kafetz. The meeting that we're planning is going to take place as a series of 2 workshops. And rather than being focused on current drought or reinventing previous and ongoing drought synthesis meetings and work groups, this workshop is really designed to promote forward-thinking, anticipatory, collaborative planning for distinct future scenarios. So we're hoping that this series of 2 workshops really lays the groundwork for a much longer process that involves many community members to develop scenarios and then run and analyze models associated with those scenarios. Inspiration for this workshop has come in part from the Delta Independent Science Board's 2020 memo to DPIC to prepare for rapid environmental change. And we hope that this workshop will lay a foundation for establishing a firm scientific basis for evaluating the full suite of impacts that salinity management alternatives, some of which are still highly experimental or have not yet been tested fully, might produce. And in particular, we're interested in quantifying and anticipating impacts on human communities within and outside the Delta, as well as on ecosystems. That is, we have yet to determine the dates for that workshop. We're actively in the planning process, but do stay tuned and try to attend once the dates are announced. The second upcoming workshop that I'm really excited to announce is a workshop on adapting restoration for a changing climate that will be held between February 2nd and 3rd. It's going to include presentations and discussions that are focused on cutting edge climate adaptive strategies as we work toward a shared understanding of ecosystem restoration across the San Francisco estuary watershed in the context of climate change. And it's anticipated that these presentations in the symposium will address all steps of restoration, including planning, permitting, funding, implementation, management, and monitoring. And it will provide information on strategies for incorporating climate adaptation and mitigation into restoration planning, adaptive management processes, as well as how we might integrate socio-ecological considerations and traditional ecological knowledge into this planning process. It's also going to provide information on strategies for determining where and when certain techniques and strategies are most likely to be effective, and identify knowledge gaps and planning tools for future efforts. And this symposium is anticipated to be a springboard that will be followed by standing estuary-wide meetings that provide a regular space for conversations on the topic of climate resilience restoration. And they're also planning on producing a standalone living document or guide on climate resilient restoration. So registration will be available for that meeting soon. Next slide. I'm also excited to report on the ongoing environmental justice brown bag series that has been organized by Dr. Jessica Rednick at the council. The September 8th seminar featured someone you all know very well, board member Laurel Firestone, and also Kristen Dobbin, who gave an excellent talk on water justice efforts in California and the Human Right to Water Act. It was really eye-opening to me. I learned quite a bit. There is a recording of that talk that's available on the Delta Council YouTube channel. And you could also view the most recent seminar that we had at the same website. And that seminar took place on October 20th and featured Dr. Jill Lindsay Harrison speaking on environmental justice reforms in government. I found that talk to be rather sobering, but also certainly very eye-opening and informative. The upcoming talk on November 3rd, so tomorrow, will feature Dr. Carl White, and he has been on the White House Environmental Justice and Advisory Council, and that talk will connect environmental justice with how we engage tribes and learn from traditional ecological knowledge. You do need to register in advance for these seminars, but you could also do that registration just a few seconds before you log into the meeting, so don't let that be a barrier. Next slide. Michael George also asked me, oh, I forgot about that. You can see the other two upcoming talks here as well. Next slide. Michael George also asked me to provide a brief update on what's happening with the environmental justice issue paper. That group is still in a planning phase and are planning to begin interviews with environmental justice and community-based organizations that are working to advance environmental justice issues across or adjacent to the Delta. So they'll soon be beginning those interviews. If you have suggestions of people who you think should be interviewed, please forward those to Dr. Jessica Rednick. You could see her email on the right. Or of course, if anyone is listening to this presentation would specifically like to request to be interviewed, please do so. In terms of the Delta Adapts project, which is ongoing, that group is working on developing an adaptation strategy as part of the second phase of that effort. And the progress there is that stakeholder work groups and sector-specific focus groups, such as agriculture, flood control, ecosystems, and water supply, are going to be meeting in December and also in early 2022. So stay tuned to that effort as well. Next slide. I'm just going to briefly mention that the Delta lead scientist asked me anything. Open office hours are continuing on Instagram Live. These are held roughly on a monthly basis. Just yesterday, I met with two-time Delta Science Fellow Denise Colombano to discuss the Delta Science Fellowship. Look to the council website to see a release of a solicitation for the next class of Delta Science Fellows in early 2022. And visit the archives on the Delta Stewardship Council Instagram TV site for more information on the Delta Science Fellowship. Other recent episodes have focused on the Sea Grant State Policy Fellowship, peer review, and I'll give a shout out to Lauren Smitherman at the Central Valley Regional Board, who joined us for a discussion of the Mercury Review Report. And then an additional recent session focused on harmful algal blooms and some of the work that we have funded through our proposal solicitation. Next slide. Regarding what's going on with the Independent Science Board, we have one vacancy currently available and two vacancies that will come available in the next year as two of our members term limit out. So I am chairing a search for 3 members, and this bullet point is a little bit outdated. Those 3 positions were just advertised last Friday. And we're looking for 1 ISB member to start as soon as possible, which is likely by June 2022, when you consider contracting time and interview time. And the remaining 2 positions will be effective by November 2022. We'll be reviewing applications on a rolling basis beginning in December through February of 2022. This is a somewhat targeted recruitment process. We're looking specifically for future board members with expertise in water resources engineering and hydrodynamics, climate science, algal ecology, invasive species ecology, and or ecotoxicology. So please help me spread the word about this great opportunity. And I am also looking for suggestions for candidates that would be great to specifically reach out to. So you could get in touch with me for that. Next slide. I only have a few minutes left, but I want to provide a really brief spotlight on a couple of relevant articles that have recently come out in a range of journals. And the first one is a paper that was just recently published in the journal Ecology and Evolution by Matt Nobriga et al. And was really focused on this relationship between temperature and the survival of Chinook salmon as they transit the Delta. So Chinook salmon obviously hatch within the Delta's watershed and then must transit the Delta as they migrate to the ocean. And this is a part of their life cycle that's typically associated with really high mortality. Back in 1989, it was found that there seems to be a 20 degrees Celsius temperature threshold at which all smolt experience mortality. And one of the objectives of this recent study was to look at the ensuing decades worth of telemetry data and test whether that threshold, which corresponds to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, still holds. And they found that it does. It's a pretty solid threshold for temperature management. Now, the other thing that happens that makes the Delta associated with high mortality for Chinook salmon smolt is that they experience relatively high rates of predation. So another objective of this paper was really to get at why we see mortality at these warmer temperatures. And one hypothesis is that predation rates go up when temperature goes up. And just a really simple reason for this is that organisms tend to have higher metabolisms at warmer temperatures, and so they require more calories to sustain their energy needs. There is also another thing that's going on, which is that we now have invasive species occupying the Delta. Striped bass and largemouth bass are both invasive species that predate upon Chinook salmon smolt, and the prevalence of submersed aquatic vegetation in the margins of the Delta encourages larger populations of largemouth bass, which use those areas of habitat. And so another hypothesis is that these fish are really encountering a double whammy. They would ordinarily go into vegetated margins of the Delta to escape predation in the open water, but if predators of invasive fish species are lurking in those margins, they're likely to be eaten there. So these authors tested this hypothesis through a combination of field studies that used videotaped tethered fish at different locations from shore and at different temperatures. And then they also conducted modeling in which they deduced parameters like fish attack rate and predation success rate by trying to get the best match to the monitoring data. So first of all, they found that there's a small effect of temperature and distance from shore on largemouth bass predation rate, but no effect of either variable on striped bass predation rate. Overall, the effect was small enough that it didn't provide support to the hypothesis that predation rate multiplies at warmer temperatures. And it also didn't provide a sufficient explanation of why we see extreme mortality at this temperature threshold. Now, the model results produced a similar conclusion, but provided an additional clue into what might be going on. Though those model results showed very little effect of temperature on overall predator attack rate, the only way that they could match the monitoring data was if the salmon smolt's swimming speed, which governs the success rate of each attack, decreased at the warmer temperatures. Now, this is curious because it's not something that we see in captive fish, but the authors hypothesized that it might arise from an increased prevalence of disease at warmer temperatures in the field, or from effects of contaminants during low water periods when they're highly concentrated. And so this is really an open area of study. It's very well aligned with priority science actions in the new science action agenda, which are focused on understanding impacts of contaminants. But I will say that while results on precisely why mortality goes through this temperature dependent threshold were a little unclear from the study, one thing that was clear is that there's a significant negative relationship between inflows and delta water temperatures. So in other words, as inflow goes down, temperature goes up. This was important to demonstrate because there's a belief that really is prevalent that flow has little to do with water temperature in the delta. And while its impact might indeed be slight, managing temperatures through controlling flow might be just sufficient to keep water temperatures below critical thresholds for fish at some places and or at some times. And the times in which there was this strong relationship between inflow and temperatures in the delta in the study were April, May, and June. So with that, I'm just going to go to the next slide. And this is the last thing I will cover before I conclude my report. I also wanted to call your attention to a series of 2 papers that have recently come out in the journal Toxics. And with this brief report, I'm really closing the loop on the cycle of identifying priority science actions, funding those actions, and then reporting out the results of the study. These 2 papers came from Suzanne Brander's lab at Oregon State University. She was a recipient of funds from our 2018 proposal solicitation. And her lab is really focused on understanding the effects of common pesticides used within the Delta on fish species. These 2 papers in particular focused on interacting effects between salinity and pesticide toxicity. And this is an issue because we know that with climate change and an increasing prevalence of drought, so there is this tendency towards salinity encroachment further into the Delta. So the study by Segarra et al. Looked at behavioral disturbances exhibited in Delta smelt larvae as a result of their exposure to common pesticides. They performed behavioral tests after exposing almost 2,000 smelt embryos to 2 selected pollutants at varying salinity levels. And they measured swimming activity and movement away from the center of the plates in which these larvae were located. That itself is an indication of their tendency or their ability to avoid predation. And the study found that even low concentrations, first of all, of these pesticides affect smelt larvae behavior, resulting in either hypoactivity or hyperactivity in the larvae compared to the control groups. And you can kind of get a sense for that by looking at the paths traced by swimmers in the part of this figure labeled B. Additionally, they found that salinity levels affect the dynamics of pesticide toxicity and behavior. And specifically, they found this interesting inverse correlation between larvae wall hugging and salinity, from which they deduced that higher salinity levels that are associated with decreased wall hugging are indicative of a behavior that could potentially put Delta smelt at higher risk of predation in the wild. The second study in this group of 2 looked at survival rates of inland silverside larvae. This is a commonly used species. It's a species that's commonly used by the EPA as an indicator of toxic effects. It's found in many estuaries throughout the US. It's not native to California, but it was chosen for this study because it can tolerate a large range of salinity levels and is moderately sensitive to pollutants. So here, as with the first study, the authors concluded that salinity demonstrated a potential to influence toxicity in this species. So in the higher salinity environments, the toxicity of most chemicals tested in the study increased, significantly so, with a commonly used fungicide. And the graph on the top is just basically showing that 50% of fish die at a lower pesticide concentration in the higher salinity waters, which indicates that salinity makes that pesticide more toxic to the fish. And you know, the mechanisms through which this happens are not yet well understood. So these authors also proposed future studies that would really focus on revealing what those mechanisms are and also looking at an extended range of salinities. So I think I will conclude my report there, and I'd like to open the floor for any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Larson, for your energy and passion and really setting the high bar here for the lead scientists. I mean, the focus on water quality is really appreciated, and the work with the Regional Water Quality Control Board around mercury. But here even the work and highlighting science around pesticides. Again, we're called to remember it's not just quantity, but quality as well. And actually both of those taken into consideration as one is really what we need to do. These are highly integrated, complex systems, and we need to continue to expand our own understanding of that complexity so we can be better decision makers. And truly, you know, that's what all of this synthesis is for all of us across the watersheds and our various agencies to be able to be better decision makers in this space. And the work that you're doing is certainly contributing to that. So I really do appreciate the good summary of what is a lot of ongoing work, but and particularly the science plan and action agenda. You know, look forward to making sure that we are contributing to that in a meaningful way, knowing that, again, we really depend upon the Stewardship Council for this sort of synthesis, because we don't have extensive resources to do this work, but we have data and information and certainly interest in making sure that we're all continuing to be better decision makers and successful in our own rights. So thank you, it is much appreciated. I don't think I have real specific question other than just my thanks, but look to my other board colleagues for questions or comments.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel.
Okay, I think I'm hearing none. So thank you so much. Really appreciate, again, the thorough overview of all the good work, and be in touch very soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that concludes informational item number 4 and brings us to our last in our tranche of a very informational item heavy board meeting with a presentation on our fiscal year 2021 annual report and performance report. And just want to thank here Greg and Bev and the incredible work that goes on, I know, to really synthesize all the various goings on in the regional and state water boards here, to be very transparent here, to be open about the work that we're doing, to be able to make sure we are communicating what exactly is going on here at the board. And want to acknowledge that former board member Tam Dodak was our huge leader in first even really establishing this performance metrics and report, and look forward to this continued evolution of this work, because it's each year has become even more impressive. And so just wanted at the top to thank you, Greg, and thank you, Bev, for all the great work.
Well, thank you, Chair Esquivel. It's a pleasure, as always, to be here and talk to you guys about the performance report, the data that goes behind it, the reflection of the amazing work that we track with this report, and the longevity of our effort on this. This is our 13th performance report. So I'm going to quickly hand it over to Bev Anderson-Abbs, who's the lead on this project, and she's going to walk you through this year's report, and I'll be around for questions. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel and members of the board. My name is Bev Anderson-Abbs, and I'm the lead for the performance reports for the Water Resources Control Board, working within the Office of Information Management and Analysis. I'm going to be presenting a summary of fiscal year 2020-2021 performance report today, and focus a little bit on some of the new additions that we've made to some of the dashboards that are available. So if I could get the next slide, please, we can start taking a look. This is the 13th year of the performance report, and as was mentioned, it's been evolving ever since it started. We have made changes in the measures that are being tracked. We've made some changes in the targets over the years. And then most recently, in the last few years, we've migrated the performance report into a business intelligence platform. And in doing so, we replaced over 170 separate static web pages with 26 interactive dashboards. Next slide, please. The performance reports have been a web-based summary organized by major functions such as enforcement, regulation, planning, and assessment, and they document the efforts to protect and allocate the waters of California. The reports have been used to help us learn from the successes and challenges in major mission areas and to systematically manage and evaluate the program's activities and priorities and to improve efficiencies within the water boards, while we've also been improving the efficiencies of reporting itself. The old format with 170 separate web pages required Division of Information Technology to update each page separately, taking more than 80 hours of 2 or more staff members' time each year. That format also required me and several assistants to download the necessary data and hand enter it into the management pages for all 170 cards. This was an extremely time-consuming and with a high potential of introducing human error in that. The current dashboards now take DIT an estimated 10 hours of a single staff person's time. And although we still have a couple of cards that require hand entering of data, most of the data entry is simply downloading and connecting it to the dashboard. So human error has been reduced almost to 0 in the last couple of years. Next slide, please. Now on to the report and looking at a bit of a summary of the numbers of the water boards. As you know, the water board is large with offices throughout the state. Staff are charged with regulating over 51,000 discharger facilities and determining water right allocations to about 32,000 water rights holders, as well as monitoring and tracking water quality, enforcing regulations, and funding various programs. And this slide gives a high-level look at some of the things that the water board is in charge of and what we spend time working on. So next slide, please. To find the performance report where you can see all the numbers and things that we're doing, you have to scroll down to the bottom of the web pages, the water board web pages, where there's a long list of programs and links down there. And down at the bottom of the third column, you'll see performance reports. Here I've circled it in red. And when you click on that, that will take you to the most recent performance report. So now it is currently clicking you to the 2021 performance report. Next slide, please. When you click that, it will take you to that most recent report with access to previous years' performance reports, although now the data from those previous years is also available on the most recent dashboard. This is not for all of the dashboards at this point because of the way data are manipulated in some of them or filtered in some, but we are working to make those prior years available on all dashboards for the future. The next few slides will provide a brief summary of some of the major targets and measures being tracked by the performance report. Next slide, please. 2021 presented us some unique challenges as staff of the water boards continued to work from home due to COVID. In-person inspections and other in-person activities were largely put on hold. On top of this, we had a 15% reduction in personnel resources due to furloughs and redirection of staff to contact tracing duties. This slide shows that in spite of the resource reductions, there was not a significant decrease in total inspections over that fiscal year. Although our data don't allow us to tease out changes in how those inspections were performed. There may have been more inspections being done as video inspections or things like that. We don't have the ability to pull that out at this point. Next slide, please. At the beginning of each fiscal year, the state and regional boards, divisions, and offices establish goals for their workload for that upcoming year. Then at the end of the fiscal year, we determine the actual work that was completed and compare it to the targets to assess program performance. Most of these targets are based on outcome or output-based things that we do. So activities like performing inspections or writing permits, writing and adopting permits and things like that. Targets are adjusted at the beginning of the year, or they were adjusted at the beginning of 2021 to account for that reduction in resources. So we did see slightly lower numbers in the initial targets that regions and programs were putting into the system. This graph shows the statewide targets achieved across the regional water boards and the state water boards division and offices, broken into three major categories: inspections, permitting, and all other program targets, which is sort of a melting pot of everything from adoption of TMDLs and basin plan amendments to cleanup activities, funding targets, all of those other things for the last 3 fiscal years. And you can see highlighted in the dark blue that the targets being met were very much on par, if not a little higher than in the last couple of years. Statewide for fiscal year 2021, the Water Board accomplished 78% of its inspection targets, 82% of permitting targets, and 66% of the all other category of targets. Next slide, please. And then this slide breaks those targets down by the organization, so the different regional boards and the state board. And it's important to remember here that by breaking out the regions, we're not trying to compare the regions, just provide the information that the regions are doing different things. You can see on this graph that the percent of targets achieved varies greatly across organizations. Different organization or the different regions will have different priorities that they set, and they have different issues that make it easier or not so easy to achieve their targets as they've set them. So a lot of regions were losing staff to retirements and various other issues. So we have to keep in mind that that is not trying to compare regions one to another. Next slide, please. And then this is a high-level summary statistic page of some of the things that we are out there regulating and doing with our staff. So we have over 50 or almost 52,000 regulated facilities, and this number changes yearly because of construction sites coming on or off the system, or various changes like that, facilities closing, facilities opening. So we're always seeing slight changes in the number of regulated facilities. Individual permits and that were issued or updated are also there. Inspections, the number of inspections that were done, and here again you can see they were down slightly from the previous couple of years, but not drastically so. Next slide, please. And now I want to go into specifically some of the cards, some of the dashboards that we've been working on, focusing on the ones that have had some changes made to them. The performance report has been moved into this interactive format for almost everything. Next slide, please. And starting here with the targets card. In this case, this shows the targets that are set by the regions, and you can filter this for the regions. You can filter back in years and see how regions are or have been handling their targets over the various years. This also has an added section with regional considerations where regions can add a few sentences to explain what was going on. If there was a fire in the area that caused them to not be able to work because they were evacuated, things like that can be added under the regional considerations. Next slide, please. This is the sanitary sewer overflows slide, and this one we've added a lot of new buttons to it. We can now go to the data behind the sanitary sewer overflows information, so you can drill into where these overflows were and look at the full data behind that. We've also added a map, and this is something that we're trying to add to as many of these dashboards as possible, where we have good geospatial data to work with that. And I've added a graph showing spills over time, so we can look at what's been going on with the sanitary sewer overflows, in this case, over the last several years. Next slide, please. Since we have really good sanitary or geospatial data for SSOs, we're able to add this map, and this shows where the SSOs have occurred. Again, several filters available on this page, so you can focus in on a region, you can look at the class of overflow or the category 1, 2, or 3. You can look back in time, and there's an additional filter that doesn't show on here where you can look at the cause of the overflow. So you can start digging very deeply into the data behind this dashboard. And then also there are several ways to get to the graph showing the sewage, the SSOs over time. And you can see based on this graph that we seem to be seeing a reduction in SSOs over time. Next slide, please. But if we look at the data in another way, it shows that there may be more spills going unreported. As we can see, the percent of compliance reports submitted has been going down. And in the last several months, where our compliance reports have gotten down to around 55 to 60% being submitted. So there may be some data missing on things like this. And this is what we want to be looking at with our data, is how do we make things go better? So this is a very helpful part of the report. Next slide, please. Likewise, for the irrigated lands program, we've added a graph showing the irrigated lands going under waiver over time. And you can see by this very quickly that although the number of irrigated lands facilities has actually gone down in the last couple of years, the number of acres under waiver continues to go up. So we're seeing some interesting things showing up in the data there, and that's available through a link on that dashboard that says enrollments over time. Next slide, please. This is the inspections, wastewater inspections dashboard. And for several of these wastewater inspections, permits, and reports dashboards, these now include all the major categories. So you can go on here and filter for NPDES wastewater, WDRs, landfills, and see what the numbers are here. So each of those reports now replaces 13 separate report cards, just all in that one dashboard. Next slide, please. Cleanup, again, this is one that's fairly recently been added with the data background. So you can look at the data. There's a button up in the top saying view data set. And also we've added a change over time for the leaking underground storage tanks. So you can see that over time, the number of storage tanks in the program has decreased while the cumulative closed cases has increased substantially. So it's a nice way to see what's been going on within that program. Next slide, please. And then the last one that I'm really kind of excited about is the water quality outcome report cards. This is The TMDL report cards section is the one that comes the closest to what we are trying to get to with outcomes-based reporting. So we do have these report cards and we've added some filters in here. So if you go to the view report cards button up at the top, and I apologize, I didn't add the next page to this, to the slideshow, but you can get a summary of all the report cards that have been written. And within those summaries, you can filter for the primary pollutant if you're interested to see, what are the main primary pollutants and how are they showing changes over time. You can filter for the outcome. So if you just want to see the cards that are getting to the point of target achieved, or the outcome improvement, you can filter those and see where we're seeing those, the improvements in the watershed. Next slide, please. And then also from the TMDL report cards, we're continuing to have the report cards being written, and more regions have started to embrace the use of story maps to be able to give a much more complete story of the watershed that they're dealing with. And this one is a really nice one from Region 6 that outlines the issues seen in the Carson River, where they are developing a vision project for dealing with the pollutant issues. And they even went in just before the report card was released to add some additional information about the Tamarack fire and the impact of that on the Carson River and how they will have to deal with that. Next slide, please. And then we still have obviously the old style report cards like this one from Region 8, which covers nutrients in Newport Bay and San Diego Creek. And this year, I believe we got 20 new report cards. So those are all available on the website as well. And next slide. And with that, I will stop and open for any questions or comments, or if Greg has anything he'd like to add.
Just thank you so much, Bev. Really, really incredible and great work here. I know that we just adopted fees not long ago, and on that side, it's always about the cost of these programs, but really appreciate here capturing the benefit, and really am with you about being excited around the water quality outcomes being something we're starting to more focus on and better connect, not just the widgets of the number of permits, but what does it mean qualitatively in communities and watersheds? And I think that's where the storyboards really do provide that better opportunity for context and for engagement around the work in a way that makes it not just a numbers exercise, which is really important here. This data, this information, I hope all sorts of folks on the academic side, stakeholders, are able to see it and flip through it, ask questions of it as well. I think that's the power of having it on these Power BI platforms, is you can ask questions. You can get curious and want to try to dig further down and maybe find that we don't parse out data or ask a question that could actually help us unearth what is the effectiveness of the programs that we're managing, and again, what are the sort of outcomes qualitatively that we can also track with this work that helps bring it to life, because it is an incredible amount of just work and leadership that goes on here at the boards, and unearthing it this way is just really helpful. So thank you. I guess my only question would just be, what are those other opportunities for incorporating more qualitative sort of information around cleanup, et cetera, that helps support the other sort of widgets data around the permits? What are the other areas, I guess, other than TMDLs that we saw, which are a ripe candidate for, because of the listings and delistings, being able to kind of track, okay, what does it mean? But I'm just wondering if there's other places where there's some thought about incorporating similar information. And thank you again.
Thank you, Chair Esquivel. I'll take a stab at that. There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of storytelling with data, as we just saw today, that happens outside of the performance report. I actually see that as being very healthy and a great way to sort of incubate up what we want to do as on a regular basis. So maybe some sort of idea of flowing the really interesting and provocative, curated, whatever kinds of story maps and stories that use data to tell the work that we do or to reflect the community's interest on what we do would be a great way to get things into the performance report. We've also talked to board members and programs and other people, stakeholders, about how to incorporate equity into some of the things that are already there. The sanitary sewer overflow map is a great example, or the data set. It's one of our highest value and high quality data sets for lots of reasons. I think people are really good about ensuring that they accurately enter information into that. And as a result, we have a lot of ways to sort of integrate that and overlay it with questions about community interests and equity, for example. So we've explored conceptually some of those things, but how to get them into the performance report formally is, it's a bit of a longer trajectory, but as we see, there's data being used to tell stories all over the place. So perhaps we just need to get out from OEMA and go to some of these meetings and participate.
Fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that, Greg. Board members, Vice Chair, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate what was just said, and also just appreciate the briefing that I had, and looking in particular at the fee issue and some of the questions that we've received on cost of compliance, and trying to kind of sort through how the tool could be better used by stakeholders, and appreciate that there have been some stakeholders that have reached out to the unit on this, in particular Coast Keeper, but seeing that there might be other opportunities for other stakeholders that would be, first of all, just using an opportunity to better understand the tool, and then us being open to suggestions. So just thought I'd share that with my colleagues, and I think that this might be, a good topic that we could talk about. I know we agreed as a board that it would be useful for the chair and I to sit down with some of the ag stakeholders on their concerns about fees. And this, I think, would be a good topic for us to bring up in that discussion.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Completely agree. Other board members?
Yeah, really great work. And this performance report, I've been involved with the board for a number of years now, and it's come a long way. And it really is amazing to see how easy it is to drill into the data. And I, as an engineer and someone who likes to nerd out on this kind of stuff, I could spend a lot of time parsing through all this and finding all kinds of great questions to ask and all kinds of great conclusions, or just other areas that we could explore. So I want to be careful in sort of teeing this up. But my when I looked at it, one thing that I found wanting a bit is a more well-rounded report in some respects, and that is in incorporating better our drinking water program and our water rights program as well into this report. It is, largely water quality based at this point, which is completely understandable. I get that, but our board has grown over the years, and there's little pockets here of information. I think we can go to different places and find, grab data from our Human Right to Water portal or other places all around our website. But I would think as a general stakeholder or just interested person, they may not be able to fully appreciate everything that we do and everything that we accomplish at the boards by just going to the performance report. So, for me, I'm not asking to spend a great deal of time overthinking this, but just like Vice Chair Diadamo was intimating, suggesting talking to Coast Keepers, talking to other stakeholders in the drinking water community and others that might be interested in that, just to see if there is an interest, and if so, how we can best represent that here in our report in the future. So I just wanted to tee that up as a suggestion and something perhaps we could work on going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, board member. I'm definitely supportive of that, and yes, noted that, and especially understandable. Division of Drinking Water has been here about 5 years, and it's still, we're still figuring out what are those widgets and how best does it all report up. But to your point, the performance report should capture all of the divisions to the extent we can, and know that it's water quality that has really driven a lot of, I think, the performance report and metrics. And and a tool of the regions as well. And I think why we see it as we see more water quality focus, but point well taken, and I'm supportive of it as well. But Mr. Bishop, any thoughts?
Sure, I've got a couple, and I think Bev wants to join in. And no question that as the board evolves, we need to evolve the performance report. I want to emphasize a couple things for the board members. One is that the way we designed the performance report was to have almost everything pulled from existing data system. So that's one of the reasons why water rights is having so much difficulty showing up, is that we need to improve that data system so that we can actually pull information directly. We've been working with drinking water to up the number of both measures and targets that they have, recognizing that they are also in the process of modernizing their data system. So one of our objectives, to put it another way, is to have no subjective information in this report, that all of these items come directly from data systems, so that we have a lot of confidence over time that as we can capture the same information and we can show trends. I'll turn it over to Bev, but I'm happy to answer any questions if that raised any.
Good points. Thank you. Bev.
Thank you, Jonathan, for pointing that out. That was one thing that I was going to actually mention, is that we are trying to make sure that we can get our data from a data system directly. And I've been working with some of these groups to be able to do that and be able to filter it in a way that it shows what they are doing and what they want to show with the measures that they have. We did just add 2 drinking water targets for next year. So we are looking at beefing up the drinking water measures and targets over the next year or so. So that is in the works. And water rights, I've been in discussions with them for quite a while to try to be able to access their data directly and figure out what they do to it to give me the numbers that they've been giving over the past. So we are working on those, and I agree that we do want to include those other programs. And one last thing I'd like to say that I missed is I just want to say thank you to the people who help with this every year. Susan Kelly with Division of Information Technology is absolutely a wonderful assistance for this. She does all of the DIT side of the performance reports now. And then on our side, to pull the data, I get a lot of assistance from Allison Calalang and David, sorry, I just went blank on his last name. They help me. He helps with pulling the swamp data. So there are some other people behind the scenes that don't get a lot of recognition in this, and I want to acknowledge that they are there and thank them for everything that they've done. So thank you so much for the opportunity to present the performance reports, and I hope that we can keep making them better.
Thank you so much, Bev, and thank you for the acknowledgement. And really critical here. It is a team, certainly, and really appreciate that. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Greg, around kind of scale and scope of performance report?
I'll just finish with this. This is a report for everyone at the board. Everyone who participates in the performance program, at least, and we're the messengers, but really the regional boards and the divisions that do the work are the ones that should be proud of the work that's being displayed here. It's a lot of work that Bevan and others in my team do, but it's really the reflection of all the programs and all the regions and everyone else's efforts over time. And it's getting better every year in terms of their active participation. So thank you for your leadership.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Greg. Other board colleagues here, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I have stuff to add. I mean, first of all, thanks. There's sort of 3 main points I want to hit. One is just let's get this information out there even more. I think, you know, other board members talked about this. I I'm wondering if we could do things like send it out, a link out when we release it to our LIRIS list. Especially maybe, we could think about how to do that, but that type of more proactive outreach to stakeholders so that they see it and then can use it. I think that can help with obviously helping them, have more transparency and accountability, but also have more public confidence and understanding in what we're doing. So I think it would be great to hear ideas for how we can more proactively get this tool, this amazing tool, into folks' hands that are stakeholders and folks that are would benefit from really understanding what we're doing. Second sort of area is just the core of this report is really about, it's about our performance. It's about more of the outputs and activities that we're doing. And there is incredible stuff in here. And I was looking just like really rich understandings of dynamics, like there were fewer inspections that for various reasons, and it's really nice to have the sort of takeaway and discussions on all of these on the page, and that was really maybe a driver of also why there weren't as many informal enforcement actions over time, just sort of understanding these trends. And in a number of areas, this was on wastewater and PDS permits. So there's just like so much, just an example of things like, as I was digging in and understanding our work, this is just such a rich tool in understanding it. I also think importantly, when we think about performance, it's obviously our staff performance and our program performance, but it's also in some ways the discharger and regulated community performance, in terms of you can see where there's compliance and reports submitted and those sorts of trends, which is also just incredibly valuable. So I think thinking about performance in both of those ways and the value there, sort of, big theme for me is just really wanting to see even more ability to link in that outcome impact metrics. There actually is a lot around water quality. Obviously the TMDL work and what's delisted, as you said, that lends itself well, and also it's just a more mature program interfacing with this. So I get that, but there's also stuff around water recycling and sewage spills, environmental indicators, water body restoration from non-point source. I'm sort of just wanted to flag, like, there actually is a lot there that I think is incredibly valuable. Would love to just see, the other divisions be able to identify what are maybe some outcome impact metrics that we can track, that we already are tracking or have access to, that would lend themselves well to including here. Again, because I just think it's so important for us to show, and both for ourselves and for the public, to really link in what kind of impact do our programs have. And I think on that, as I've said before, to the extent that we can have some that, at least one that's linked to like our core, I think there's 4 or so core strategic goals, beginning to develop that by just having some outcome metric that we think is appropriate that might be linked to those. I'm thinking about the goals with our strategic work plan and sort of, overall core mission there. And then, just also related to that outcome Sean, I think you mentioned this, but we have these great tools like the Human Right to Water map, but also things like all the water quality monitoring data that we're collecting. And I would just love to figure out, is there a way to kind of integrate or, those data sets to think about outcomes and trends? Because at the core, that's what this is, right? Is like, how is water quality improving? And can we see that with the data that we're collecting and sort of linking in those tools? Again, I'm not suggesting like a brand new thing, just thinking about how we're using the different tools that we have on this sort of outcome impact side. I also just want to acknowledge that, as I was digging in, there's some great stuff on the budget and resources for programs, which I really love, to be able to see kind of how are we allocating, resourcing are the different programs and how that compares. It's just very, again, kind of valuable information and understanding the work we do and the resources that go into it. And I know that's also obviously linked to fees, but and then sort of last point is, and I think this is touched on, as we're working on racial equity and adopting our racial equity resolution, would love to see for the next report, some things that we can be adding in already. And then I'm sure that the action plan that'll be developed over the course of the year, we'll be looking at how to do that even more. But just lastly, again, thanks. Let's get this into the hands of folks that can use this. And I love digging into all of it. I also just will say, I really appreciate there's like a takeaway, of okay, you've got all this data, but like, what does this mean? And I really appreciate that because sometimes you don't really know how to interpret all the information you're seeing. And I think that's incredibly valuable. So thanks.
Thank you, board member. Any other comments? And I think Director Sobek wanted to make a comment here as well.
Thank you, Chair Escobar. I just wanted to sort of state the obvious, which is this was a year where COVID impacted both the actions of our stakeholders and our ability to do our job. And I think that we've all recognized that it's been amazing how we've managed to keep on working and to be really productive. And I think that the results of this report do underscore that. But I do think it'll be interesting to look at some of the comparative numbers between years, among years, and try to figure out were some of those shortfalls due to, like failure, inability to meet some of our inspection numbers. I know we do modify goals, and we did have a little bit of COVID experience under our belt when we set last year's goals, but or was it an actual intentional non-COVID related reallocation of resources? US EPA has wanted us to get rid of some of our permitting backlogs, and so maybe there were some trade-offs from permitting to inspections to address that. So, it's just, there's never a dull moment. There's always a lot more than is evident from the beginning. But I do think that just like a lot of other agencies, there'll be an asterisk on this year or so where we try to figure out how the pandemic did or didn't affect our work.
Thank you, Ms. Sobek. And thank you again, board members. Just incredibly proud about the transparency, the culture of openness and transparency that we have here at the board. Again, curating and ensuring that all this information is out there. And to board member Firestone's point, let's make sure we circle back around this document. Let's continue to make sure in our engagements, use it, pull data from it, allow it to really have a life here throughout the year, and put it in the hands, importantly, of communities and others that can look at it, assess us, tell us where we're not doing right, find again, information amongst the data that help us be better decision makers and leaders here in our space. So just thank you. Again, I feel very proud to be part of an organization here that has such a strong history in openness and transparency, which is something that is very close and near to dear to me. It's, the lack of faith sometimes in governance in government institutions leads me to want to make sure that we're open and transparent. We have as much sunshine shining in, that folks can really engage with our work and understand everything that the board is doing, and that they can join us as decision makers to help us be better decision makers. So thank you, just incredibly, and look forward to further iteration. I know, again, there's a lot of just incredible potential and a lot of incredible successful work already here to be had. So thank you all for it. Okay, I think that wraps up our item number 5 and brings us to our last item of this board meeting, which is board member reports. Any board members here with reports? And if I can, I'll go ahead and just kick us off and just mention 2 things that occurred last week. I had the honor and pleasure of joining Assistant Administrator. Well, first, I'll just note that the Water Quality Coordinating Committee meeting happened here, gosh, where are we? Just a week and a half ago. It was, not this past Friday, but the prior Thursday and Friday. And just wanted to thank Meredith Thompson, who was our Water Quality Coordinating Committee meeting coordinator, and her incredible work. We had Radhika Fox, who is the Assistant Administrator for the US EPA Water Office, come and be our keynote to engage with the regional board members and ourselves. We had a very focused discussion around this coming year, which will be the 50th anniversary next year of the Clean Water Act. And note that here already, we at the board, with the passage of 50 years of the adoption of the Porter-Cologne Water Quality Act, reached our own 50-year milestone. So we're here part of 50-year institutions that have another 50-year history here in the future, but that looks a lot different because of the climate crisis. And it was a great opportunity to reflect with Justice Roby, Secretary Blumenfeld, other partners and invitees to really have a moment to touch base on this incredible 50-year history of work that we have here at the water boards collectively, and the need for really focusing on what the next 50 years of the Clean Water Act bring, and the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the other important laws that certainly we are all here called to implement. So just want to acknowledge and thank what was an incredibly inspiring and successful, I feel, Water Quality Coordinating Committee meeting, which is in the Water Code and directs us to meet once a year, all as collective water boards members. So thank you all for participation and work in that. The other thing I would note is that I had the pleasure of participating early last week with Mayor Garcetti and Assistant Administrator Radhika Fox, along with LA County Sanitation and other folks to commemorate what is the granting of a US EPA WIFIA loan to Los Angeles for their water recycling project at the Glen Tillman facility. And that was a great opportunity to really acknowledge how important water recycling is, we know, to the future of California's water systems. Really just pleased and thankful for the partnership at the federal level, which have also contributed to other projects like the San Diego Pure Water Project, which the board has also contributed to, and other significant projects throughout the state, particularly in the space of water recycling, which again is just such a critical tool we know here at the board as we advance direct potable reuse. And here, as I understand it, next fiscal year, contemplating somewhere around 1.2 billion in investment in water recycling projects. So just thankful for the opportunity to join the groundbreaking for that event. And the other note was just, I did attend last week my first Salinity Control Forum meeting. This is a Salinity Control Forum gathering of the basin states to address salinity issues on the Colorado River system, which contribute to what are, we know, millions of dollars worth of cleanup when we talk about the reuse or the use and reuse of those waters, those Colorado River waters. The amount of salt in them is ultimately burdened upon folks in Southern California as they reuse that water. And so the issue of salinity, although certainly not top of mind as one of the hottest things out there to discuss, is actually really a critical one, and fortunate to have joined a number of basin state leaders as we discuss the investments that are made on that system to help address the salinity challenges. Salinity challenges we know here within our own state borders. When I think of certainly the Central Valley and other critical groundwater basins that need to ensure we have salinity control programs and plans in place to manage that for the long term, so that we can continue to use our groundwater resources to great effect. So those are the things I wanted to make sure and bring up, and kick it over to any fellow board colleagues for reports.
I'll just add a couple. I am getting a tour with the Placer County Water Agency to see some of the small systems they're working on and have already started to consolidate and to regionalize. So I'm excited about that. I also just was going to mention that Region 4 at their last board meeting was looking at adopting they're creating their own racial equity action plan just for the year, complementing the work that's going on throughout the water boards, but just really interesting and exciting to see what each of the regional boards are doing, but one that I got to see and how they're already starting to formalize a lot of and be intentional about a lot of the actions they're doing on racial equity. And that's it.
Great, thank you, board member. Others?
Yeah, great job with WQCC this year, Chair Esquivel. It was a really engaging discussion, so thank you for that. On Thursday, I did have to leave a little early because I was invited to speak at the California-Nevada AWWA conference. And they asked me to speak all about the drought, which I of course did, obliged that, and had plenty of information to share. So they were appreciative, and of course I had that. It was a great opportunity because I could talk about a level 5 atmospheric river and bomb cyclones and all kinds of fun words coming up. And so I opened with the kind of cliche, but hey, you should probably invite me back more often because it seems to start raining and it's here, so it's a little awkward. But hey, the drought could continue, and I guess they like that message. They've already invited me back in the spring, and so here's hoping that it works. So.
That's fantastic. Thank you, board member. I'm glad you were there, and glad you got the invite back. So that's good. It's a good sign. It's a good sign. And AWA, they're such critical partners, and here the California Nevada section certainly in particular. So thank you. Appreciate that. Other board colleagues? Okay. Hearing no other reports, then I think that concludes our board member reports, and actually brings us to the conclusion of our board meeting. I think this is one of the first board meetings we've actually concluded here, not after 12 hours and a full day of sitting here. So thank you everyone for the good discussions here. We do have a closed session item rather, and looking to you, Mr. Lawfer, is 20 minutes okay for folks, and go ahead and convene for closed session at 1, or a little more time if it's desired, by all means.
Certainly, I will defer to the board member's pleasure on that. 20 minutes is perfect. That'll give me time to reset the table and get to another meeting room. So unless there's any concern, I'll alert staff that 1 o'clock is our start time for closed session. I will see you all shortly.
And Mr. Lawfer.
For the record, the only closed session item is the item disclosed on the board's agenda today, and it's the various lawsuits challenging the 2021 curtailment regulations and curtailment orders in the Delta watershed.
Thank you, Mr. Lawfer. I think 1 o'clock works unless I'm seeing any objection, and I'm not. So we'll gather together here for closed session at 1 o'clock. And this otherwise brings this open session of our board meeting to a close. So we'll see you all here then in 2 weeks, and appreciate everyone's participation and discussion today. We'll see you then. And Mr. Lawfer will officially close us out here then after closed session. So thank you. Take care, everyone.